All right, here it is, Sunday, late morning, I guess. I got Raid playing by itself. I'm back here to tackle the rules. You know, it's funny. I thought, yeah, you know, I'm not doing a lot of vid on the rules. I'm doing a shit ton. Like, intro A, fine, whatever. Intro B, which was reading the rules, basically, that took like 3 hours of video, I think. And I'm not halfway through the main part of the rules. Why is this? I don't know. Too many rants, maybe. Too unhappy. Like, you know, once a game starts setting into that, this is just fucking crazy for what it is. I can't dispel it. I can't dispel it. I want to face this more like EU. But when I did the rules for EU, first of all, I was very familiar with them, which is not the case here. But there are games with this size rule book that I don't eat up this much time on. So I don't really know, except that the only way I hope to be able to remember all the shit that's going on in the special rules is to read those special rules. I think we were on Control and Unrest, which is pretty similar to the Here I Stand design. Okay. In order to get political control, you're going to need a line of communication. And so the line of communication rules are in this section. Okay, good explanation of why. There are other places where you need a line of communication, though, like Siege. So it really should be its own section, but that's just me. And, you know, this kind of editorializing, there's a lot of it in here because once I start getting the crank factor up, I'm like, I begin complaining about everything. But I don't know that that's bloating the rules. An LOC is tracing spaces in C zones to that space from a friendly controlled fortress or strategic space that is a home space for the power or one of its allies. This can be major or minor ally. It can also be traced from any port you control in the Canary Islands. All spaces must be friendly controlled, free of enemy units, free of unrest and plague. C zones have to contain a friendly naval unit, and the path must connect to these C zones through friendly controlled port, except the space where the path ends, which can be non-friendly port, so that you can siege it. An LOC is required for assault and control unfortified spaces actions. Yeah, assault is the siege thing. Guanches never need to trace a line of communication to assault or remove control spaces. The Guanches are, I guess, the natives of the Canary Islands. Okay, on unfortified spaces, you can spend 1 CP to control it and gain political control of the space, but it has to be independent, controlled by an enemy power, controlled by the Beltranejos if control is being gained by Portugal, or controlled by the Catalan if control is being gained by France. So there's this weird situation where you're able to seize Beltranejos or Catalan territory if you're the Allied power. That's kind of odd. To gain control of a strategic space, the control strategic space action is used at a cost of 1 CP. Now this is kind of funny. Why is there a different action for both? Land units controlled by the active power must concurrently occupy the strategic space. Okay, because you have to actually occupy the strategic space. Oh, here we go. To gain control of a simple space, you also spend 1 CP, and the land units controlled by the active must occupy the space or be adjacent to the space with no enemy land units adjacent. And a pass does not count as adjacency here. Okay. So there's not a control. So they say there's a control strategic space. Yeah. Weird. It's sort of the same action. It's just got like different requirements. I don't think there should be 2 different entries. That just feels weird. But anyway, it's that kind of critique which is causing me issues. And when I have to go through the rules with a comb, as opposed to like what I did with EU. With EU, I knew it well enough that I could describe each of the major components as I hit it, and I could leave out a lot of the special cases. But here, I'm actually not all that familiar with, the Here I Stand system anymore. It's been a long time, even though I played games based on it, like the Time of Wars, not that long ago. Well, one game at least. Not that long ago. It's still like learning a new game to me again. And that's pretty much the case with most things. I played enough EU that all at once that like it's stuck. One game of it is a lot of it all at once. Anyway, in case B above, that's adjacency. Land units controlled by the active power adjacent to the space do not have to have an LOC themselves. The LOC is to the space being converted. Units conducting a siege and under siege must all still be considered when evaluating case B. Place a new control marker on the space to indicate the owner, unless it's reverting to the original, in which case you remove any control markers. Guanches never control spaces, but they do remove markers from players with this action. Okay, whatever. Let's fit all the special rules in. Again, like, there's special rules for such things that are like, just core game stuff, right? Like control of spaces, the guanches, a minor, power that nobody really controls, have special rules associated with them. Sure, it allows you to like not produce as much, as many components is really all it does. But does it really? Because like, instead of calling these independent, I don't know, there's just all kind of shit. You wouldn't have to make all these exceptions if like you didn't want to. Like there's no real great reason for adding this many exceptions to the rules, and it's just so fucking painful. Anyway, place if the space is a port that contains naval units, those naval units must retreat to a sea zone adjacent to the port, following the instructions in the naval combat. When the active player has units from more than one of his powers in a space being controlled, that player chooses which power gains control. Political control of fortified spaces only changes based on negotiation, assault, and event cards. Unrest markers. We have somewhere. Okay. Wonder what they're on the back of. The back of fortifies? Yeah, they're on the back of the fortress markers. So we don't expect many of these to happen. Are placed on spaces due to event card play. They have the following effects. Units may not use spring deployment, retreat, or avoid battle into or through a space in unrest. No LOC can be traced. No units in fortresses. No units or fortresses can be constructed in unrest. A key space or strategic space in unrest is not counted when tracking victory points. During the winter phase, passing over spaces in unrest causes attrition. A fortress in winter does not roll a die against a piracy attempt in an adjacent sea zone. Some spaces subtract 1 from a ruler's charisma or prevent die rolls to obtain cards if they are in unrest. I don't remember this. Like, this is something you'd think it's a pretty big deal. Somewhere in the special rules section, they have this. I understand, hey, between two sea zones, maybe some special rules need to be noted and whatnot. But man, do they enter a lot of crap in this game. A space in unrest may not be counted by a player toward any objective that requires control of one or more spaces. You can take a control action, essentially. You do a control simple unfortified space, which you would think is this. Does it actually say control simple on fortified? No, it just says controlled on fortified space, which strategic spaces are. But anyway, yeah. You can use the control simple unfortified space, which is a command which is not on the cards. It's the control unfortified space, which doesn't work for all unfortified spaces, although it could have, because it's all in the same rule. To remove unrest from any space, if one of the conditions is met, land units controlled by the active player occupy the space. Land units controlled by the active player are adjacent to the space, and land units of an enemy power are not adjacent. Removing unrest does not require a line of communication, though. So it's like another third little type. Why? I don't know. Displacement. If control of a space changes due to negotiation, intervention after a DOW on a minor power or an event card play, units friendly to the previous owner of the space may be displaced as described on specific cards and in the rules section. When displacement occurs, any land units and army units occupying these spaces are placed in the nearest fortified space controlled by their power or in a controlled home key. Naval units and leaders are placed in the nearest port controlled by their power. Count sea zones as spaces when determining shortest path. If two spaces are equidistant, the space is chosen by the owning player. It's all just going over my head in a blur. I don't know. This doesn't often happen. And that's part, I feel like I have to read every word, and that makes it worse, but I feel like I have to read every word because it's not sinking in at all. If as a result of an event, any unit is required to be moved to another location, make that move regardless of the unit's location at origin, be it a captured leader, a space under plague marker, that unit is besieged, etc. I don't even, the sentence doesn't even make sense to me. Control of an island. Track and control of the Canary Islands for these purposes. The islands of Gran Canaria and Tenerife. Gran Canaria is this little blub. Tenerife is this one. There's so many little lines and stuff in it that, it starts to become hard to see what the hell is going on. Are each worth 1 victory point to the controlling power. A power that, and that's these markers here. A power that controls all 7 islands also gains a victory point. Another one. And we have a marker for controlling the entirety of the Canaries. A Spanish power who controls 5 islands does not have to make a navigation check between Zone 1 and Zone A. And does not suffer plunder during the winter phase if he controls all the Canary Islands. 21.8, Conquest of Canary Islands, back in the special rules. You gain control of an island if you control all the spaces that are a part of that island. All islands have a single space except Tenerife, which has 4, and Gran Canaria, which has 3. Okay. One thing that's been on my mind is that Spain really wants to control the Canary Islands. Portugal historically kind of contested it. I'm not really sure the game encourages that, because it's going to be early in the game and Portugal has a lot of shit to do, right? They don't start with anything on the Canaries, and it's pretty hard to justify just going in there to fuck with Spain. Now, especially since there are cards that will eventually surrender all the Portuguese holdings in the Canaries. Anyway. Movement. You can move land units with a move formation in clear for 1, or move formation over pass operation 2 command points. All land movement is restricted by the formation rules. Remember, a leader has a number of troops that he can command, but you can also move units without a leader. You can create a formation that's smaller. Land movement may trigger interception by enemy formations. Enemy stacks are also allowed to try to avoid battle and withdraw into fortifications in response to move actions. And I think we'll do this couple of pages and that's it. Okay. There's restrictions on movement. Land units and army leaders must start the action in the same space and must be permissible to move them in a single formation. Formations always move into a space controlled by their power or into an independent space. A formation may only move into a space controlled by another power if the active power is at war with the power controlling the destination, or the active power is allied with a power controlling the destination. Formations may not move into a space containing land units from another power unless the space satisfies one of these conditions. All units in the space are allies of the active power, and this is not a fortified space where one ally has another ally under siege. All units in the space are enemies of the active power, and this is neither a fortified space where one enemy has another enemy under siege, nor a fortified space control. Yeah, let's put all these exemptions in here, but this is what you have to do when you're dealing with point-to-point movement. And it's part of what kind of, most CDGs are point-to-point. Their movement rules are just this series of things that it's hard to stick. This is a space controlled by an enemy power, and all units in the space are either from that enemy power or allied to them. When resolving this movement, treat the units already in the space as enemy units for all purposes. Adjacent units from a power with units in the space are also considered as enemy units and may intercept into the space as desired. I mean, it's just not sticking. This is a fortified space under siege where either all units inside the fortification are allied to the active player and all besieging units are enemies of the active player, or B, all units inside the fortification are enemies of the active power and all besieging units are allied to the active power. So that's something, again, it just passes over my head. That's something about the style of rules. This kind of procedural and nail everything down and get everything specific, it makes the whole game kind of become a blur to me. It's very, very helpful when you're looking up later if there's any kind of dispute about everything. It feels like they really nailed down the rules hard. That creates rule bloat, and that creates, for me, lack of comprehension of what the rules are trying to say. They're not giving me a big gist of things that I can just like, yeah, I'll look this up later. It's not that. It's one point after another that's like all these little, they're all very similar and they're all kind of saying the same thing, and because of that, it just becomes like this hash that I can't understand a fucking thing out of. Independent regulars in a fortified space never prevent the entry of a formation, though that formation might have to fight off troops from an enemy power before being able to siege the independent key. No army leader or unit may participate in a move action of which they were part if they were part of a formation that lost a field battle earlier in the impulse. Important because you're not moving, like in most CDGs, you're activating a leader and moving his force. The Here I Stand flavor is you're using a command point to move a space. So that decision causes some of this issue. No army leader or unit may participate in a move action if it occupies an enemy fortified space that their power placed under siege earlier in this impulse. So using the same card, you can't screen something under siege and then move more troops in for further siege activities or move through it or whatever. One or more army leaders may move without accompanying land units as long as they don't enter a space controlled by an enemy power or containing enemy units. If an army leader is ever alone in an unfortified space where enemy land units enter due to, and they give the whole list of things that might have caused this, I guess, that leader is captured. Maybe they don't. Enemy movement, retreat, or interception, not like, I don't know, not like building troops or something. What happens in that case? I don't know. Place the it's like you give me a list of the things that allow for this rule, and it's like, yeah, but there are cases you're not covering here, and I'm pretty sure you don't cover anywhere else. That leader, so if they got rid of the how it could happen, you'd know what happens. But now you're left with the, well, why did they specify those three? Place the captured leader on the enemy player card. The enemy player gets a victory point if this is the first leader they have captured in the game. There are counters for first leader captured. The leader may be regained in the diplomacy phase of an upcoming turn if a naval leader is ever alone in an unfortified space when enemy land units enter due to enemy movement, retreat, or interception. Again, the only way they're listed that you can do that. Place that leader on the turn track to re-enter play on next turn. Now, granted, it's really unlikely that you would move a leader into an enemy-controlled space where they can build troops. But there might be cards that do weird shit that you're not counting on. No unit may enter a space with a plague marker. Each land or naval unit that attempts to move out of a space with a plague marker, either the spring or action phase, has to roll a die. On 1 through 3, they're eliminated. If several units move out together, you roll dice for all units simultaneously, and then you decide which ones to lose for each roll, for each successful roll. Roll a separate die for each leader moving from a plague space. If they roll a 1 or 2, they go on the turn track and re-enter play next turn. Again, you can't your leaders can't die in this game except by age, which is whenever they historically died, whether that was age or not. Bothersome to me, but it maintains balance based on the quality of the leaders. And you don't have like replacement leader rules or anything like that because of it. The two move actions follow the same procedure. You declare the formation, you declare the destination space, which has to be adjacent, of course. You expend the CPs. We really need words for each of these. Then all players can play response called torrential rains to disrupt this move action. So, torrential rains is the kind of event that pisses me off because it sounds like weather control. You know, I'm holding the capability to do this bomb thing. Worst of all, anybody can do it. So, you know, we're all paying attention and have our wizards involved in there. But that's just another gripe. Interceptions can occur if the enemy stack is adjacent to the destination space. Now, we're going to give a lot of the interception rules here and then repeat them here. Interceptions may add enemy units to the space being entered. Any player can play a response card ambush to ensure any player that an interception succeeds. So, here I am again. The torrential rains, no matter what, that card's going to piss me off, right? But here I am as the Spaniards fighting the Portuguese, right? And the Portuguese move, and I'm going to attempt an interception, and oh, look, the French play an ambush card. And you could make an argument that the Portuguese maybe have, they're expending some sort of capabilities that they have in terms of spying capabilities, whatever, that they're actually costing themselves something to play that automatic interception. It's really hard to say that France is expending capabilities to get information to Portugal. It's just harder. I mean, you got to wave your hands so much to believe most CDGs. I often, used to look at Clash of Monarchs as the poster child of, they're doing it kind of right in a lot of ways. But honestly, looking at Clash of Sovereigns, and I think they're very similar, they get a lot wrong. I don't know. Maybe Clash of Monarchs was better. It was just the being so happy to see sort of the two different types of events. Events you can control and events you can't. But the events you can't control was more of a global type thing, like somebody dies or something like that. Anyway, where the fuck am I? Once all interceptions have been resolved, the land units and army units being moved are placed in the destination space. If any interceptions succeed, skip to step 8 and resolve a field battle. But otherwise, if you enter a destination that contains enemy land units, some of them can try to avoid battle. Can't happen if there's an interception in that hex. Any player may play the response card Organized Retreat to ensure that the avoid battle succeeds. Again, why the hell is France able to help Portugal, help Portugal conduct a tactical retreat? I don't know. I can't come up with an argument for that. That's a fucked up thing. Like, they went out of their way to irk me with this shit. You know, the weather cards, look, you want to include them, right? They're a standard in the style of play, but and it pisses me off, but whatever. What you know. But this whole idea of like being able to influence the tactical decisions, not the decisions, but the capabilities of another power's forces using your resources kind of in the moment. What the fuck? Withdraw into fortifications. If after any unsuccessful interceptions and avoid, or if after unsuccessful interception and avoid battle attempts, again, can't be done if there was a successful interception, the enemy stack in a fortified destination space has 4 units or less present. Those enemy units have an option to withdraw into fortification. They could. I don't know if that's the truth. I think you can actually withdraw with part of your force and leave part of it to fight a field battle. That's not how this is worded, though. And then you fight a field battle, which has its own rules, of course. I want to quit. I want to quit again. All right, and enemy power interception and avoidance is often one of the places where a lot of the CDGs that use bubble maps and whatnot, they have similar rules, and you could say all area movement games do too. They have kind of similar rules, but they're almost always a little different. Okay. If an enemy moves into... I gotta read it. An enemy power with land units adjacent to a move's action destination may attempt to intercept the moving formation. If multiple stacks are there, each can attempt to intercept. Each attempt is announced and resolved before announcing and resolving any other attempts. If multiple stacks from different powers all want to intercept, resolve them in impulse order, which is apparently always fixed. Once one power succeeds, no other power may attempt interception, even if that other power is an ally of the intercepting power. Formations belonging to the successful intercepting power, however, can continue to try to intercept and throw more troops in, which seems like a great deal of coordination, but the game is also very abstract. Spaces are quite large, and time, most importantly, time is quite large. Formations moving due to avoid battle, interception, and retreats may not be intercepted. Formations may never intercept across a pass. Only units of a power that is at war with the active power can intercept. I thought that was covered. Units and army leaders that have already tried to intercept a movement in the same impulse may not try to intercept again, whether or not they were successful. That's interesting. Units and army leaders currently under siege may not try to intercept. Makes sense. If a besieging force moves out of a space under siege, the stack formerly under siege may not intercept the move out of that space. All land units and army units allocated in step 1 of the interception procedure must start the move action in the same space, and it must be permissible to move them in a single formation. Leaders may not intercept by themselves unless the destination contains units friendly to that leader. Formations moving into a friendly fortified space that is not under siege may not be intercepted. And this is why my voice goes, because I'm just reading a list. I'm reading I'm reading a fucking recipe. Formations moving, there's no interest, which is, when you read a recipe, you don't start thinking about what the food is like, usually. Formations moving into a space that already contains land units may only be intercepted if the intercepting units belong to the same power as the units in the destination space or to a power allied to the units in the destination space. Such an interception is not allowed if there are units under siege from any power in that space at the start of the active formation's move. This rule also prevents interceptions into empty fortified spaces by units that are not either from the power that controls the space or an ally of that controlling power. Again, went right over my head. Maybe I'll learn what it does if I have to look up this rule. Units may not intercept into a space controlled by another power unless the power controlling the space is either an enemy or an ally of the intercepting units. Procedure. Declare the formation. Lots of words there. Roll dice. 2 dice, add the best battle rating of an army leader in the intercepting formation to the sum. Add 1 if there are more cav in the intercepting than the moving formation. Subtract 1 if there are more cav in the moving formation. If the modified roll is 9 or more, the interception is successful. If it fails, the player may play a response card ambush to force it to succeed. Any player may. If successful, the intercepting formation goes into the destination space. The formation is treated as if it were present before moving arrived. Sort of, kind of, it will prevent avoid battle or fortification withdrawal from happening. Once any one power succeeds, no other player may attempt to intercept. Even if that power is an ally, yeah, let's repeat everything every single time. It's got its use when looking shit up, I'll tell you that much. It's really helpful when looking shit up. It's really bad for learning shit. And I'll gripe either way. Repeat for, although this feels excessive. Repeat for other formations. Yeah, you do the steps to do stuff. Fight a field battle. If any are successful, all units from the intercepting power must participate. Avoiding battle. When you enter a space containing a stack of enemy land units, some or all of those enemy land units can try to move to an adjacent space to avoid battle. If the destination space contains land units from more than one major power, each power may, in impulse order, announce and resolve and avoid battles. Wow, you could screw your ally over by, walking away from a defense just to be an ass. So each such attempt is announced and resolved before announcing and resolving any other attempts. Minor power allies in that space avoid battle as a single group with units of their affiliated major power. A power is never required to try to avoid a battle or intercept. I don't know if it said that. I mean, units may not avoid battle into an independent space or a space controlled by another power unless that power is an ally of the power avoiding battle. Units may not avoid battle into a space into unrest with plague or a space containing enemy units. Land units may not avoid battle into a sea zone. Units may not avoid battle into a space just vacated by the enemy formation the units are trying to avoid. By the way, the not being able to avoid into an independent space or a space controlled by another power, that's the kind of little hitch rule that you really have to be absolutely aware of when playing the game to be able to cut off retreats and stuff like that. But it's also, the kind of thing that just is not present in my head. I will not remember things like that. And it means that I won't be able to utilize the kind of tactical, tricks that maybe somebody could play by moving a unit into a space to cut off the retreat and then another unit forward. I don't know. Units may not avoid battle into a space just vacated by the enemy. Units and leaders currently under siege may not avoid battle. Units of a power may not avoid battle if any units of that power intercepted into the space during this move action. Well, you know what? You wouldn't get a chance to do so because the avoid battle is skipped. A leader alone in a space may not avoid battle. If the space is unfortified, he's captured. If the space is fortified, he must withdraw inside. Oh, we got to swap batteries. Hoping to avoid that. All right. The procedure now. First, you declare attempts. And you resolve them completely before moving to another power's units that might want to withdraw from that space. You designate a destination. You choose which units. It may exceed the number that can be moved as a formation. Any number of units can be left out of the avoid battle attempt. You can even leave out all land units to have an army leader avoid battle by himself. The power avoiding battle rolls 2 dice and adds the single best battle rating. Add 1 if you have more cav. Subtract 1 if the reverse is true. If it fails, you can play, or any player can play Organized Retreat to force it to succeed. If the modified die roll is 9 or more, the attempt to avoid battle is successful. By the way, specifying cards and their capabilities, it's kind of helpful in understanding, what's going to be possible in the game. But boy, is it like anathema to the idea of a CDG. The idea of a CDG is to offload rules into the cards. I don't know which way I go with that, but it bloats. Exception, if every unit in the formation attempting to avoid battle has already lost a field battle in this impulse, it can avoid battle automatically without a die roll. And you could create multiple formations, so have one that lost the battle and another that didn't. If successful, the units selected to avoid battle are placed in the chosen adjacent space, and then you return to the others. Now, I thought there was something here. Withdrawn to, if after any unsuccessful interception and avoid battle attempts. I don't think there's a requirement. Like, I don't know. Like, this seems to state that you'd need, the way this is worded, if after unsuccessful interception and avoid battle attempts, if any, the enemy stack has 4 or fewer units present, they can withdraw into the fortification. I just don't think, I think that is stated in a way that's confusing, and it's not what's meant. Maybe the if any is supposed to cover that, but whatever. It doesn't work. It doesn't do the work properly. Okay. Withdrawing into fortification. Enemy units in the destination space may withdraw inside fortifications of the movement procedure if the following. The destination space is fortified. The enemy power controls the destination space, i.e. the power that's trying to withdraw. Enemy units, enemy power. There were 4 or fewer units present in the space after interception and avoid battle attempts were resolved. This is stated correctly. Artillery and cavalry units are always counted against this limit of 4 units. A power is never required to withdraw into fortifications. It's always optional. If they do withdraw, all units present must withdraw together. If units for more than 1 power defending the space when the active formation enters, the power controlling the space decides whether or not to withdraw into fortifications. If the units decide to withdraw, a field battle is avoided during this impulse. If the active formation has more units than the number of units inside the fortification, this fortification is now under siege. The active formation does not have more units. It has 2 choices. If there's CP remaining to be played, the active formation can spend 1 or 2 to continue movement into an adjacent space. But if they're forced to retreat from this new space back into the fortifying space, they'll be eliminated. Something to keep in mind, because you probably have to retreat back to the space you came from if you're attacking. Otherwise, the active formation must retreat back into the space from which it entered the fortified space. This retreat does not cost any CP, but the retreat must abide by all retreat restrictions listed back in battles. And we are done for a while. Right, pushing on a little bit. Field battles. They occur due to a move action into a space occupied by an enemy formation or because of a successful interception. Each power involved adds up how many battle dice they get, and they make a decision whether to charge with their cav. Most of this is going to be same as Here I Stand, but cav is new. The way the militia works is a little different from how mercenaries work. This number of dice is then rolled to see how many hits are scored. Each hit is a casualty on the opponent, and the side which gets the most hits wins the battle, retains the space. The defeated force must retreat. All right. First thing, you can play response cards in impulse order. Any player, things like nobles return home, mercenary militias. Some of them kind of make sense that you'd be able to control. Some of them maybe less so. So like something like nobles return home, again, in that example of Portugal and Spain fighting a war and France intervening, You could kind of see the French being able to push some diplomatic power into that. So, it depends on the card, honestly. How much I dislike who has capability to play it. And I can see for generosity wanting to make them all playable by anyone, but again, it depends. The attacker adds up their dice. They get 1 for each infantry or cav unit in the moving formation, but not siege artillery. 1 for each battle rating point from the highest rated leader. And if the attacker does a cav charge, they get an extra die for the first cav unit and 1 extra die for every 2 full cav units beyond that first. So, let me think. It's divide by 2 rounded up. Okay. Okay. My pipe went out. Defender gets dice as well. 1 die for each defending infantry or cav, 1 for each battle rating point from their highest leader, 1 for just being the defender, 1 if the field battle space is a strategic space controlled by the defender. Advantages there. And then they also can do a cav charge at the same ratings as the attacker. Then the attacker declares combat cards. Now remember, before we had response cards, but now it's combat cards. Only the attacker can play these. And then the defender gets to declare any combat cards he wants to play. Multiple people could be defending at the same time. Then you roll the dice. 5s and 6s hit, but 4s might hit. If you rolled 2 dice from regular units, from cav units, from being the defender, or from defending in a strategic space, the first 4 counts as a hit. Do not include dice for cav charges. If you did a cav charge, you're going to be getting at least 1 die from the cav. Yeah, you might only get one die from the sources that they list. Right? Yeah, if you have a single cav, I guess. Okay. If your side rolled 4 or more dice from these sources, 2 dice of 4 will count. And again, I'm assuming the cav. And obviously 4 dice is harder to reach. The response cards, Cav Pursuit and or Leadership, can be used at this time to modify the combat results. Okay, whatever. Good to know the timing. The side scoring the most hits is declared the winner of the battle. In case of a tie, the defender wins. Each side eliminates 1 land unit for each hit scored by the opposing side. If you got extra dice from a cav charge, the first cav has to be taken from a cav unit. That's your penalty for that. Of the remaining losses, at least half must be taken from regulars or cav if possible. In addition, if there were units of more than 1 power on either side, the number of casualties must be split between them as evenly as possible, regardless of the types. The 2 requirements above on how to distribute losses are ignored in field battles involving relief forces. If both sides are completely eliminated, the side that rolled more dice retains 1 unit. Cav units that charged may only be chosen if they were the only units in the combat. If both sides are eliminated and the 2 sides rolled the same number of dice, the defender gets to keep a unit. If 1 or more leaders are present on a side that's completely eliminated, they're captured by the leader. They go into the dungeon. If it's first leader captured, there's a bonus. Captured leaders may be recovered, and the Guanche leader Bencomo Maximilian and the mercenary leader Cesar Borgia, if captured, are removed from the board. If the eliminated side is a formation of a player against a formation of independents, place the leader on the turn track, and it'll return. The units of the losing power retreat, as described in the retreat rules, which are coming up very shortly, and they apply to a couple of, to not just field battles, but to the withdrawal. And if the battle occurred in a fortified space and the active player won, check to see if the active formation has more units than the losing player has inside the fortification. If so, the space is now under siege. If not, the active player must retreat as specified in breaking a siege. If it was a relief force, see another rule. These will all be in the siege rules. We'll try to get them in before I break again. All remaining units and army leaders from the losing player have to retreat, exception independent units, when they're on their own. Well, they're always on their own. If the battle occurred in a fortified space and the player controlling that space lost the battle, any number of land units up to 4 and any number of army leaders can withdraw into the fortifications. Artillery and cav are always counted against the limit of 4 units. The stack of units remaining outside the fortifications after such a withdrawal, or all losing power units if the battle did not occur in fortified space, have to then retreat to a single adjacent space chosen by the owner of the units. That space must meet all the restrictions below. If there's no such space, all the units will be eliminated and any army leaders are captured. You may not retreat into an independent space or a space controlled by another power unless that power is an ally. You may not retreat into a space in unrest with a plague marker or containing enemy units. You may not retreat into a C zone, because you can't stay in a C zone. If the defender lost the battles, his units may not retreat into the space from which the enemy entered. If the activating power lost the battle, he must choose the space from which he entered the battle, which is how you get cut off and destroyed very easily, like by bypassing a fortress, right? Land units in a fortified space are placed under siege if they withdraw into fortifications during enemy movement or after a field battle, and enemy land units in that space outnumber them. The land units under siege may not move, attack, intercept, or avoid battle until the siege is broken. However, naval units in port under siege are allowed to move. It is possible for a fortified space to be under siege by 2 powers at once if those powers are allies. Both are at war with the power that controls the space, and each power possesses more units in the space than the power inside the fortifications. A besieging power can spend 1 CP on the assault fortified space action in order to gain control of the space, but not on the same impulse in which the space was first put under siege. No coup de main. There may be a card for it. A space may only be subjected to 1 assault in a single impulse, exception for Beltanejos units after the Peace of Alcasovas. Great. Whatever. Like, I'll remember that. Power may initiate multiple assaults in different spaces in the same impulse. Assaults are conducted... By the way, it was pointed out to me that there's some sort of player aid. I don't remember what it was called. It's like the diplomacy player aid or something that contains a list of all these things. That's not going to really help me. I appreciate that it exists or whatever, but you overburden something with too many of these kind of exceptions. It's just not going to work for me. It just isn't. Giving me a list of all the exceptions is no better in a lot of ways. Anyway, where were we? Units controlled by the active player must have placed the space under siege in a previous impulse. Fortified spaces that are empty have to be put under siege in 1 impulse before they can be assaulted later. Again, let's put that same exception back there. You can initiate multiple assaults in different spaces in the same impulse. Yeah, that's not particularly surprising. But only 1 assault in any given location. That's what it is. Okay. I skipped over and got lost there. Okay. And wait, not just Alcanovas, but Maximilian's forces are also able to, I guess, do something special, even though that's not here. So yeah, whatever. The assaulting power has to have an LOC into the space. The power that controls the fortified space does not have a naval unit in an adjacent sea zone. And the power controlling the fortified space has naval squadrons in the space If the power controlling the fortified space has naval squadrons in the space, you have to have a greater number of naval squadrons from the assaulting power in adjacent sea zones in order to conduct an assault. You can still put it under siege, but Corsairs are always ignored for these two requirements of the naval blockade. All right, before we get to the assault procedure and the rest, I have to swap batteries again, and luckily that one's just finished. How does it happen? You declare a formation of units making the assault. All the requirements listed above must be met. I think you're not allowed to use cav, but that's not there yet. Play response card. They may be able to take losses. Other players may play the response card Torrential Rains to disrupt the assault. Any player in impulse order may play a response card such as Nobles Return Home or Mercenary Militias to change the number of units. Add up dice. The attacker is the active player. If it's against a fortified space with no defending land units, he gets 1 die for each infantry unit in the assaulting formation. Cav being ignored, but you could dismount them forever. 2 dice for each siege artillery unit, Aragon and France only. 1 die for each battle rating point from the highest rated leader. If there are defending units, including even if they're all cavalry, you get 1 die for every 2 infantry in the assaulting formation. Rounding up. Why did they choose to write it this way, where with the cav charge they didn't? They went a different way. I don't know. 1 die for each siege artillery, 1 die for each battle rating point from the highest rated leader. Okay, so the difference is you have the attacking units. The defender gets 1 die for each defending unit in the space. Artillery and cav are ignored though, however you can dismount cav. 1 die for each battle rating point, and 1 extra die for being the defender. But the biggie is you have the attacker's die roll by having defenders there. The attacker plays combat cards, the defender plays combat cards. You roll dice looking for 5s or 6s, but the defender might hit with some 4s. If the defender rolled 2 dice from regulars or from being the defender, i.e., if he had any regulars present, the first roll of a 4 is a hit. If the defender rolled 4 or more dice from these sources, the second roll of a 4 is also a hit. And yeah, you're not going to get much more than 4. You can get 5, I think. The response card, Master of Siege Artillery and or Leadership, can be used to modify the combat results. Great, thanks. I mean, I've got sort of this, okay, it's useful to know that there are cards out there that'll do this, but I would have assumed such in a CDG anyway. Take casualties. And knowing when it happens, I'm hoping the card tells you. I shouldn't have to look in the rules to see that. Each side eliminates 1 land unit from their stack of units in the space for each hit scored. If the defending units are composed of units from more than 1 allied power, losses must be evenly split. Successful assault, if the attacker scored a hit and there's no defending units remaining in the space and at least 1 attacking unit survived the battle, the assault is successful. The attacker gets political control of the space. Is there another kind of control? Like, there's a difference in some games where having the military there gives you military control, but I don't think that's defined here at all. All besieged army leaders are captured. Place a captured leader in the dungeon. Get the victory point if need be. They can be recovered. If Bencomo, Maximilian, or Borgia are captured, remove them from the board. If the leader is captured fighting a formation of independence, place the leader on the turn track. These are all general rules that this boilerplate just keeps getting repeated. If the defender has naval units or a naval leader in the space, place them on the next turn of the turn track. Okay. If no attacking land units remain, the attacker did not score a hit, or any besieged land units remain, the assault is unsuccessful. If the number of besieging land units still exceeds the number of defenders, the space remains under siege. Otherwise, the attacker must retreat. If all attacking units are eliminated, surviving attacking army leaders are displaced, not captured. If earlier in the impulse, units, and I don't remember what displacement means, but it probably means going back to your key or something. If earlier in an impulse, units and leaders joined a stack of that power's units already besieging a fortified space, those newly arrived units and leaders may participate in the assault and can be included in the calculation, provided that the full complement of attacking forces can fit within a single formation. All right, a formation friendly to the units in the fortification may enter a fortified space in order to break the siege. Units and army leaders inside the fortification that are controlled by the same major power as the relief force may participate in the field battle. These forces inside may participate even if the total number of units now exceeds allowable formation sizes. The player may choose to withhold units that started the impulse within the fortification if he doesn't want to risk losing them. In relief situation, the requirements to take half your losses from regulars and cav and to distribute your losses between powers do not have to be met. You're free to distribute the losses as you see between the two forces. There are 3 possible results. So that's just weird, right? I think it's meant to allow you to preserve your relief force, which kind of means you might as well throw them in. I don't know. There's some chance that you might lose the space due to that. If the active player wins the resulting battle, the besieging force retreat and the siege is broken. If the active player loses the battle, but the number of hits scored by both sides is equal, the active player may choose to retreat any units or army leaders that participated in the battle into the fortifications. Including units that were part of the relief force. The total number of units inside the fortification can never be more than 4. All other attacking units must retreat. If the active player, as per 14.1, not as per breaking a siege. Okay. If the active player loses the battle and the number of hits he scored was less than his opponent, units and leaders that started the impulse inside the fortification must retreat back inside. All other units retreat. So you can kind of get the relief force into the walls or get the units in the walls out the way this is worded. If you manage to cause at least as many, to cause the same number of hits. A siege is broken immediately if the besieging stack no longer contains more land units than are in the fortification. Cav and artillery are included in these counts. This may occur if part of the besieging force leaves the space as part of a move action. They give all the reasons. I mean, why? This retreat does not cost any CP. If no such legal space exists, the units are eliminated and army leaders are captured. Very strange, right? The what is it? A besieging force, if it fails in an assault and everything's eliminated, the leader escapes. But under these conditions, see, but here they say if a besieging attack takes severe losses. So I think there's a contradiction here. I'm not gonna parse it out completely. But if you fail and are wiped out in an unsuccessful assault, the surviving army leaders are displaced. But if you fail and don't have enough troops and can't retreat, your leader gets captured. I would say that's the superseding case. I don't know if it's a contradiction. It's an ambiguity that you kind of have to resolve. And the only way you can kind of resolve it is to say, okay, the retreating units, like some of the failed assault survived. They had to retreat. They couldn't retreat anywhere. The leader stuck with them and surrendered. And it's not a strict contradiction, but it does feel a little fucked up, to tell you the truth. Units may not retreat into a space in unrest, plague, or containing units that are not from or allied to the retreating power. Units may not retreat into a C zone. Units may not retreat into an independent space or a space controlled by another power unless that power is an ally. The ordering's different here. I was expecting the independent thing, and I was going to complain about that. All right, that's it for now. We take another break. You know, we're halfway through the rule book. And most of the way through the, like another 10 pages or so, before we get into the stuff that's just pure special rules Chrome. Much of which is embedded in these other rules. Again, there's a serious rules bloat issue here. I don't know. We are around dawnish. Oh. Monday morning, as I try to plod through some more of this. You know, I'm thinking, I've done some pretty complex games, right? EU among them, A World at War over there. The kind of nice thing about those is I didn't have to do it with EU, but I had to with A World at War. If I want to kind of learn the complexity of the game, I can play a subsystem of it, right? So like with A World at War, I played a couple of little scenarios that helped deal with things. But there are no, you know, there's a shorter scenario in this that starts you partway through the game. But there's really nothing, and honestly, the systems aren't that complex. I think it's just that the rules are verbose. Like ridiculously so, because it just doesn't feel like there's that much complexity to them, but there's a lot of repetition. All right. Naval units do shit in sea zones. Great. They can also initiate piracy in sea zones against enemy ports or against any port in the case of Corsairs and Casanova. Naus use naval movement to traverse the non-European map. You can send escort squadrons to previously explored ocean zones to defend your settlements. You move your naval units with the naval move action, which costs 1 CP per ocean, well, per sea zone, whatever. Unlike land movement, where a move action allows just one formation to move. Oh no, the naval move action allows all naval units and naus of a single major power and their activated minor power allies and any Lent fleets to perform a move wherever they are on the map. I forgot about that. Yeah, that's weird. Naval units on the main map and naus on the exploration map may each move based on the expenditure of the same CP, except escorting squadrons, which never move from the ocean where they are located. As per Section 5.4, the naval units of Castile and Aragon move and fight as a united Spanish Navy. I don't know that they're even differentiated. They just say Spain, and, you know, so... repetition. I mean, I'm okay, but it just seems excessive here. So a naval move by Spain allows all naval units of that player controls to move. The Muslim and French players, however, do have to specify which of the two major powers is moving each time they undertake a naval move. I'm assuming there's no... whatever, the Civil War, the Castilian Civil War, Badajoz or Bada, I don't know. I can't remember how it's spelled, so I can't pronounce it. Like, it's not a word that's in my head. The exception, on turn 1, the Catalan and French navies are considered to be a single force. Oh, good. Just what we needed. Okay. There it is. You know what? If I stack them together, that'll help. We have a shot of remembering that. Like Spain above. What a weird... Muslim naus may move when a naval move is initiated for the North Africans Alliance. Naval movement into sea zones, but not ocean zones, may trigger interception attempts by enemy naval units. Enemy naval units in sea zones are also allowed to try to avoid battle in response. All naval movements are to an adjacent location. Ports are adjacent to sea zones. Sea zones are adjacent to all ports with symbols in their zones and all sea zones that share a common boundary. Cabo Bojador is adjacent to the Canary Islands. Despite the Canary Islands appearing in a box extending the main map. Oh, Cape Bojador. Okay, well, it's spelled different, it's spelled differently on the map than in the rules again. I guess that's this. These are actually in that sea zone. It's not an adjacent sea zone. Okay. Only Naus can move between ocean zones. Ocean zones and sea zones are never adjacent. Ocean zones are adjacent to all ocean zones with which they share a common boundary. Ocean Zone 1 is also adjacent to the built Naus box. There's an arrow to indicate that. Cool. On turns 1 and 2, only Portugal can possess Naus, and they can move them into the ocean zone corresponding to the current turn. Zone 1 on turn 1, Zone 2 on turn 2. During this time, Portugal may only found settlements on spaces printed with the color of their home power. However, if the School of Sagres, Henry the Navigator, is played, yay, Portugal, more special rules, may enter any of the first 3 sea zones and may found settlements there without restriction. However, they do have to give priority to their zone, to their own color, so they can't block people out. Starting with turns 3, ocean zones 1, 2, 3 can be explored by any power. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, A, and B can only be crossed when the mandatory event Overseas Voyages has been played. To remind players of this restriction, the area is highlighted with a red border. Didn't we read all this before in the map rules? Oh, boy. Okay. All settlements are considered to be adjacent to the ocean zone contained in the same exploration map. Naval units of 2 different powers that are not at war may occupy the same sea zone after a move. Naus and naval squadrons may occupy the same ocean zone even if their powers are at war. Interception attempts, avoid battle attempts, and naval combat are only triggered against enemy naval units on the main map. Naval movement must comply with the following restrictions. They must always move to an adjacent location. Movement between the Alboran Sea and the Gulf of Cadiz is dominated by the 4 or 3 towns that are ports. And you need permission to get through. Naval units may only move to ports controlled by another player if enemy naval units are present in that port. This prevents you from moving into a port controlled by a major power ally. Naval units must be in the same stack as a naval unit controlled by the same power whenever possible. Naval leaders must be in the same stack. And never on the exploration map. Naval leaders may accompany any naval unit that is moving from a naval leader's port or sea zone. If naval movement is going to empty the naval leader's port or sea zone, then that leader must accompany one of the units that's leaving. Again, this is the nailing things down. You would assume that from the other rules, but yeah. No naval unit may participate in a naval move if it was part of a stack of naval units that lost in naval combat earlier in the impulse. A single player may never have more than 2 Naus on the exploration map, although he may have any number in the built Naus box from turn 3 onward. Portugal has some exceptions during turns 1 and 2, or when the School of Sagres can be played as above. Okay, the exception's not here, but it may be somewhere else in this rule, or it may be in the special rules. All right, what do? You declare a naval move, and you declare which naval units and leaders will be moving and designate the destination for each of these units. Each unit's destination must be adjacent to its current location. And you execute it. Oh, God. You declare you're going to bake muffins, Then you collect the ingredients. Get the list of ingredients, then start telling you what to do with them. The active player executes all naval moves. The order of execution is not important as all moves are considered simultaneous. Stack the newly arriving units on the destination port, sea zone, ocean zone, or settlement as follows. If arriving at a port, the arriving naval units are placed below any land and army leaders that are oriented normally, horizontally. Here we're getting into all kind of notations without the reason for them, like, physical positioning of the units without the reasoning being apparent yet. If arriving in a sea zone, I'd rather have the rules and then a hint of how you should notate handling the rules. By the way, there's a lot less fog than there is most days. I don't know what that means for today. I think it's supposed to rain again. If arriving in a sea zone containing units controlled by the active player, the active major power, the arriving naval units are placed on top of the other friendly units and oriented the same way as those units. Yeah, but what if they want to move? Oh, good God. They're all considered simultaneous, but if arriving in a sea zone with no units control, they won't be simultaneous because nobody has that many hands, right? If arriving in a sea zone containing units controlled by the, If arriving in a sea zone with no units controlled by the active major power, the arriving naval units are placed in the zone rotated 90 degrees, so they're oriented vertically. If arriving in an ocean zone, go see something else. If arriving in the built Naus box, if the Naus enters the box with a resource, it's placed on the turn track to re-enter next turn. The player receives the Naus's loot immediately, with a reference. If the Nau does not hold a resource, it remains in the box. The built Naus is considered adjacent to Zone 1 only. If arriving in a vacant exploration map box, go see 16.6. Again, the same thing for the ocean zone. Other players can play the response call or torrential rains to disrupt a naval move action. Interruptions to Naus must be declared prior to any rolls for navigation or for exploration of the terra incognita. Stacks of naval units that are oriented vertically, i.e. they just moved into an area where you haven't had naval units previously. That's what it, that's the key here, right? That's the takeaway that you want there, but not oriented vertically, because that's unmeaningful. The only way it's meaningful is to go trace it back to here to see what you were supposed to do and everything. And it's just not a good way to get the rules into my head. If multiple enemy stacks are adjacent to the destination space, they can be intercepted by enemy naval units in an adjacent location, but not the same. If multiple enemy stacks are adjacent to the destination space, what happens if you arrive in a sea zone with units controlled by someone else? That actually is just not covered. But I don't think you can be intercepted. I guess you're being attacked in that case. Again, it would help to, the rules should tell me about what's happening, right? Not how I position my pieces and turn them and everything. This is all designed in a way that just is not designed to get through to my head. If multiple enemy stacks are adjacent to the destination space, one or more naval units, owning player's choice from each stack, may attempt to intercept as a single stack. Each such attempt is resolved separately, and the owning player chooses the order of the attempts. If multiple stacks from different enemy players all want to intercept, resolve interception attempts in the impulse order. Now, what's important here is that all the ships move before you make any of your interception choices. So you get to see what the intended game state that the active player has is. Okay, restrictions. Once one power succeeds, no other power may attempt an interception, even if the other power is an ally of the interceptor. Interception may not be attempted by naval units in a location that now contains naval units from the active player. because you're being pinned down by the units moving into your space, attacking you. Interception may not be attempted into a destination space that contains one or more enemy naval units hostile to the intercepting power that are still oriented normally. I'm going to have to reread that to understand it. But you see, I have to translate each rule, basically, to get to a meaning. And that's the only way that this makes sense to me. And I haven't been doing that for the most part. Interception may not be attempted into a destination space that contains one or more enemy naval units hostile to the intercepting power that are still... Okay. Yeah. You can't intercept into a space where somebody was already present, who you're at war with. If the intercept, which means that you get cover from your ally, sort of. You can move into an area where your ally is, well, your ally in a particular war. The intercepting power rolls 2 dice and adds the battle rating of the best naval leader, the modified result of 9 or greater. I think it's really cool that they're all the same target. I've seen some games where they're not for interceptions and withdrawals, and that's really painful. And it's kind of like, oh man, you're fucking like just shaving it too close when you're trying to get that kind of differential in the rolls. If successful, the intercepting naval units are placed in the destination space and oriented vertically. Okay, what does that mean? That they're noted that they just arrived, I guess, but they're not the active player. All stacks that so it has no meaning to me right now, right? We haven't hit where the meaning is. The meaning of that being oriented, again, it's just recipe now, you know. It's just recipe when it tells me that. And I'm not asking for a more bloated rule set. I'm asking for one that's more intuitively based and not like reading a fucking cookbook. The same problem I had with Axis Empires over there. Although that was worse by far, I think. But this is a much simpler system. Where are we? I don't know. A modified result of 9 or greater. If successful, they're placed. All stacks that successfully intercept are combined into a single stack and will fight as a combined force in the naval combat in step 9. Oh boy. It just fatigues me so much just reading this shit. And you know, all rules fatigue me, but this one is killing me for what it is. Any player may play the response card Sea Fog to cancel a successful interception roll. Again, a case where why the fuck does somebody who's not involved have any control over this? And honestly, why does anybody have control over it? You know, shouldn't the interception die roll be the success or failure? No further interception attempts may be made into that zone. This impulse, like, who's controlling the weather, man? Conduct avoid battle. Enemy naval units in sea zones, not ports, can try to avoid battle if both these conditions are met. These conditions represent a sea zone entered by the active player in step 2 in which no intercept occurred in step 4. So if I move into an area where there were inactive ships that I want to attack present, yeah. All enemy naval units are oriented normally. The naval units of the active player are oriented vertically. I just made it into the space. Resolve avoid battle attempts in impulse order. The enemy power attempting to avoid battle designates an adjacent location into which they will try to move. Adjacent ports must be controlled by the power. Adjacent sea zones may not contain units from a power at war with any of the units avoiding battle, no matter how small. Like one ship can block a big fleet this way. All of this power's naval units in the sea zone must avoid battle together. The power avoiding the battle rolls 2 dice and adds the battle rating of a leader, again aiming for a 9. If the avoid battle attempt is successful, units are placed in that chosen location. All right, it's time to swap batteries again. Good. And this is why it's taking forever. I mean, not just by editorializing and reading through every fucking word to try to get to the point where I can distill stuff, but also there's just this, I'm just getting so fucking fatigued. It's a huge fucking garbage truck. Just turn around by backing into my neighbor's, like, driveway. You know, next to, My driving is so bad, I know I couldn't do that with a car, but it's just like, I've never seen anything like that before. Somebody in a garbage truck or something is usually, they'll just keep going. They'll find their way around the block if they need to or whatever. They'll turn in some other way. I don't know what was going on there, but really weird to me. Like, just never have seen anything like that. All right. It doesn't take much to excite me. There were cartoonish trucks, which wouldn't make a big deal to me, but I wanted, this was, I don't know, a couple days ago, last week, but, I want to run down and tell my wife, come look, there's cartoonish stuff going outside, because that was her words for it, and it really, she thought a lot of the crap that we use here in the U.S. is just kind of ridiculous looking. It looks like stuff out of cartoons, but there's a reason stuff shows up in cartoons, right? All right, we did the response cards. Rotate units. After all avoid battle attempts are complete, rotate all units that are vertical to a normal orientation. Great. If naval units of the active power and an enemy power occupy the same sea zone or port, naval combat occurs in that location. The active power resolves the naval combats that result from a naval move in any order it desires. If more than one enemy power is present in the sea zone, the active player chooses which one to fight first. Allied stacks are not combined. He must continue fighting enemy naval forces until he either loses a combat or has fought each enemy once. I don't know if I believe that as a reasonable solution. First of all, you think of the combination of fleets in the Napoleonic Wars. Fine, this is an earlier period. Maybe there was less integration. But, what was the great naval battle? A little later than this game. But the Turks basically fought a combined, Allied Christian Navy. Now, it's possible for such a Allied Navy to be done with lone markers and stuff like that. And again, the alliance, the alliance rules are different in this, right? So, we're talking it was basically Venetian and Spanish ships for the most part, and lots of other things. And I think you could make an argument that it was all, it would all be allies of the Catholic power, but whatever. Of the Catholic monarchs of Spain. So, I don't know. But it feels kind of weird that you couldn't coordinate between allies, is I guess what I'm saying. It feels like there should be something other than just the lone markers. Send naval escort procedure. Okay, this is something completely different. This was all naval movement coming to here. I guess this is sort of, I don't know. I don't know what's what. It's hard to tell what's supposed to be under what. Maybe this is just part of 16.1. I don't know. It feels odd to me because here we have Section 16.1, lots and lots of words, big paragraphs, and then restrictions on what we just talked about. Great. Then a procedure for what we just talked about. Dividing lines. It's all kind of held up. Then we have another restrictions to the procedure. And again, it feels like it's elevated to the same level as these. And then we come down here, and then this feels like it's elevated. And they all look the same. And I can't really discern, I'm expecting something like 16.11 to cover the basic naval movement procedure. And then this would be 16.12 or something like that. I don't know. Because there's stuff here that kind of doesn't work with oceans. Oh, if arriving in an ocean. Yeah, okay. Anyway, naval squadrons may be redeployed to an ocean zone to act as escorts to support nous and settlements in that zone. Naval squadrons never reach an ocean zone by standard naval moves. Instead, if a player has explored at least one ocean zone, he may take a special variant of a naval move. Aha, you got to pay different. called Send Naval Escort Action. Naval move. Send naval. Interestingly, that's not its own thing. Oh yeah, build send naval squadron to an exploration mark spot. Now that's weird because it's got a build in it. What the fuck? I don't believe that that matches this. Just like the names on the map don't match the rulebook. Okay, it's a special hidden variant that doesn't exist on your chart. Declare a naval escort move. The active player declares which single naval unit he controls on the main map will be moving and designates a previously, so it's one naval unit, previously explored ocean zone as the destination. The destination can be any explored zone regardless of distance. And then you're placed in the ocean zone. No navigation check is required and interception is not possible. So this is kind of interesting. We'll talk about it in a moment. Escorts may also travel to ocean zones during spring deployment or build naval escort action, which is the one that we found, but it's build and send. So here's the interesting thing. I can't transfer between the Mediterranean and the Atlantic through normal movement. But I think I could move from the Mediterranean into the rest of the world. And no, there's no Suez Canal yet. Without having to deal with Gibraltar, with the Pillars of Hercules, we shall call them, because it's both sides. Very interesting. All right, I got to switch pipes. Naval combat. Occurs in a naval movement into a sea zone or port occupied by enemy naval units or because of a successful interception. You add up combat dice and roll to see how many hits you have. Hits can cause casualties. The side with the most hits is the victor. The losing side has to retreat. I can't cope with my pipe anyway. Attacker's dice. 1 for each Corsair, 2 for each naval squadron. 1 die for each battle rating point from their highest rating naval leader. The defender. 1 for each Corsair, 2 for each naval squadron, 1 for each battle rating point, and 1 for being the defender if the combat takes place in Ragusa. Another special rule. Highly defensible port gets a special rule all of its own. The attacker declares any combat cards they want to play. Defender declares any combat cards they want to play. You roll your dice. You need 5s or 6s. After seeing the results, you can play a response card, Admiralty, to give one side an attempt to score additional hits. Okay. Any player can play it. Again, seems weird. Somebody not involved throwing cards into a combat. The side scoring the most hits is declared the winner of the battle. In case of a tie, the defender wins. Each side eliminates 1 naval squadron for every 2 hits scored by the opposing side. The player losing the units gets to choose which units are eliminated from play. What is on the back of these? The back of these is Corsairs. Okay, that's why. But that only makes sense for the Muslims. There's nothing on the back of other countries. Good. I just wanted to make sure there wasn't like a 1-point damaged ship. So it takes 2 hits to sink a ship. The player losing the units gets to choose which units are eliminated. If hits against the Muslim remain after applying hits to naval squadrons, each remaining hit eliminates a Corsair. Odd hits remaining against the losing side eliminate 1 extra naval squadron. Odd hits remaining against the winner are ignored. So if you get the most hits on somebody, you might cause an extra hit that way, essentially. The rounding side. If both sides are completely eliminated, the side that rolled the most dice gets to keep a unit. If both sides are eliminated and they rolled the same number of dice, the defender gets to keep a unit. Again, pretty standard compared to their land combat rules, so that's cool. If the combat occurred in a port, the attacker retreats to a sea zone connected to that port that's free of enemy naval units. The attacker retreats whether or not he wins. If the combat occurred in a sea... And why are you attacking him in port? Well, one, you kind of guarantee you get to fight him, and he doesn't seem to have any real advantage unless it's Ragusa. But also, you have to beat up the ships in the port in order to siege a city, if I recall correctly. Although I think if you have more ships at sea, you get the advantage anyway. If the combat occurred in a sea zone, the loser retreats to an adjacent port under his control or an adjacent sea zone free of enemy naval units. If no such location exists, the naval units are eliminated. If one or more naval leaders are present on a side that's completely eliminated, they're placed on the next turn on the turn track. All naval units lost in combat are also placed there. In a future turn, the leader will re-enter play, and the naval units may be rebuilt. So they don't go right into your force pool is basically the limitation. Naval transport. If you have naval squadrons or corsairs in one or more adjacent sea zones, you can make a special move of land units across those sea zones. This is a naval transport, and is considered a special case of move in clear. You spend CP and move. The active player must have at least 2 CP remaining to spend in the current action phase. If so, a formation of 5 or fewer land units, plus whatever leaders, in a port may move to an adjacent... You still have to follow formation rules, but you're allowed 4 units for free. So, an adjacent sea zone containing naval units controlled by the active power. Artillery and cav are always counted against this limit. The move costs 1 CP and is considered to be a move formation in clear. You can move by naval transport. You may not be intercepted at sea. Other players can play torrential rains to disrupt it. A formation under siege may not be moved by naval transport. It won't be under siege if you clear the sea zone, I think. I'm not sure. Again, I can't remember these rules. Yeah. I'd have to go back and look that up. Multi-zone transport. And again, this is the kind of thing that just isn't going to stick in my head. Right? It didn't stick between reading the siege rules not too long ago. A couple of days, but still. And now this. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know. Let's look at siege. Because this is where boats are important, right? And it'll be under some kind of restrictions section, so I'm looking for something like this. The power controlling fortified spaces naval squadrons, a greater number of naval squadrons from the assaulting power in the adjacent sea zone cancels them out so you can attack. What was my question? Formation under siege. Yeah, so I'd have to have a boat in the port under siege to break the siege. And less fleets in the space that I'm moving to, but there would have to be combat and all that if that happened. The active player then continues to move the formation to an adjacent sea zone or port at the cost of 1 CP for each move. Moves from sea zone to another are permitted as long as you have a naval unit in each sea zone and enough CP to get the formation back to a port. You may never end an impulse with land units at sea. You must end a naval transport with 1 formation before starting another one later in the impulse. Oh, God. All right, we're going to stop at piracy. Formations end their naval transport by moving to a port adjacent to the last sea zone they entered. The port must conform to the following restrictions. It may not contain any enemy naval units. It must be a space into which the power could move using land movement. It can't be a port of a power that the active power is neither allied nor at war with. Treat this movement into the final space as if it were a move action, which can allow interception, battle avoidance, withdraw into fortifications, force a field battle. Naval transport and field battle. If the active player loses a field battle in the port space at the end of a naval transport, all transported units will be eliminated and any army leaders are captured. Special naval transport to the Canaries. Castile may undertake a special naval transport move that allows up to 5 Castilian land units to move directly from a controlled home port adjacent to the Gulf of Cadiz to a Castilian-controlled port space in the Canary Islands. The cost of this action is 4 CP, and no naval units need be present for the move to be taken. What would it normally cost? 1, 2, 3. No. Sorry, it would cost less. 1, 2. This is Cape Badajoz. Yeah, so I think it would only cost 3. So it's actually more expensive to do this. But you don't need any boats. You don't need boats in both of these to protect it. So it would cost you to move the boats into place. So I guess 4. Makes sense. A single Castilian leader may move at no CP cost to one of these Canary Island port spaces controlled from any Castilian home space at the end of a Spanish impulse instead of extending the impulse with a resource. Again, a weird sort of thing. Instead of extending, it's not just like an automatic thing that you're allowed to do every resource. If you do extend it, you're not allowed to do this special free move. And, you know, again, just weird things that like come up that it's like, why would you choose to make it that? Why is that specified? Just to create more burden, as far as I can tell. I mean, is there any significant historical edge added to it? I don't believe so. I believe the game is too abstracted for that. Anyway, it's paused on. But later, I did some reading, took a bit of a nap. Not much of one. Enough to have a dream, and then I'm back up here. All right, if a power has naval units in a sea zone, he can spend 2 CPs on the initiate piracy action and target any enemy power that controls a port adjacent to that sea zone. In addition, if the Muslim player has corsairs or the French has the leader Casanova with naval squadrons in a sea zone, they can initiate piracy against a major power even if the 2 powers are not at war. You declare that your naval units in a sea zone are initiating piracy. A major power that controls 1 or more port spaces connected to that sea zone must be specified as the target. Unless the Muslim is initiating piracy with corsairs, or the French with Casanova, with naval squadrons, the active and target powers must be at war. Each player may only initiate piracy in a given sea zone once per turn, and they get a little piracy marker from their nation. You know, I hadn't placed these out there. I probably should have these here. So you only have 3 of these markers, which is how many you can do each turn. There's some exceptions here. Barbary pirates of Tlemcen and Algiers Regency allow the Muslim player to conduct piracy without placing a piracy marker. The Algiers Regency has additional property of allowing piracy in zones where a Muslim piracy marker is already present. A single zone may only be targeted once during the execution of either event. Okay, so each player may only initiate piracy in a given sea zone once per turn. And I think they can only do it 3 times, but I'm not positive of that. They only have 3 markers. Piracy markers are used to enforce these per-turn piracy limits. There's only 1 limit. I guess there's multiple sea zones, but that's listed. Each sea zone can be targeted for piracy by no more than 2 players per turn, and each player is limited to 3 piracy actions per turn. Okay, so there's more. These are the limits following the colon, not the one that's listed up here. But it also helps enforce that one. Okay. Spread across both his major powers and across all sea and ocean zones. Do not include actions where piracy markers are not placed per the exception above. Targeted power gets some dice. They get 2 dice for each naval unit of the targeted power in the sea zone where the piracy is occurring. Only if possible if the Muslim is initiating piracy only with corsairs or the French has the leader Casanova. I'm not sure why. It's of the targeted power. Oh, because otherwise they would have had to fight a naval battle at that sea zone. 1 die for each naval unit other than a corsair of the targeted power or another power at war with the active power in a port without a plague marker or sea zone adjacent to the sea zone where the piracy is occurring. 1 die for each fortress controlled by the targeted power or another power at war with the active power adjacent to the sea zone where piracy is occurring. The fortress must be adjacent to the zone where the piracy is occurring and may not be in unrest or under siege. I mean, this is really goofy. 1 for each fortress controlled adjacent to the sea zone. This fortress must be adjacent. Again, this is a sort of a failure of the copy editing to trim stuff away. That, as far as I can see, they've done a pretty damn good job of avoiding inconsistencies and such not, but that's the kind of thing that, like, copy editors should catch. 1 die if this is piracy by the Muslims and a unit from the Spanish military orders is in a port adjacent to the zone where the piracy is occurring. Again, special rules. You know, yes, it's useful to have this all in one place, but it's like, oh, damn. Roll dice against pirates. The targeted power rolls the number of dice computed. Each 5 or 6 will be a hit. If the Muslim initiated piracy with corsairs, you start eliminating 1 corsair for each hit. If hits remain after step A, eliminate 1 naval squadron from the active power stack for every 2 hits scored. Units eliminated are chosen by the active player. If exactly 1 hit remains after step B, eliminate an extra naval squadron. So you kind of don't want to do piracy near, like, you don't want your fleets there. You don't want to do it near the enemy fleets. They will catch you and hunt you down. Then you add up the piracy dice, which is a weird looking word. Like there, it just looks weird to me there. Looks fine here, it looks weird here. If 1 or more naval units from the active power remain in the sea zone after step 3, and at least 1 corsair remains if you're targeting a non-enemy power, under the one case where corsairs matter, even though it doesn't say that, because the French don't have corsairs. The active player will roll for piracy. The power receives the base dice as follows. 1 die if there is only 1 naval unit of the active power in the sea zone, or only 1 port of the targeted power connected, 2 dice otherwise. Then you add the piracy rating of any naval leader present in the zone to get the final number of dice. Then you roll those. 5s and 6s again are hits. For each hit scored, the targeted power must choose to do one of the following. Eliminate a naval unit that they control in or adjacent to the targeted sea zone. Allow the active player to draw at random and keep 1 card from his hand. It cannot be played until a future impulse. Remember limits. And also it says see 6.3 if the player also has resources in hand. I don't remember what that is. Like if it forces you to choose between to randomize or something like that. I really don't remember. Like everything, it just passes through me. Do I want to look it up? I'll have to during play, but it's not going to help me now. But on the other hand, for you to understand what the rules are, we kind of have to. And so we look. Okay, it's if you have more cards than resources. You choose, it's based on which you have more of or something like that. Who knows? Who cares? Really. Award the active player a victory point for piracy, or remove 1 Spanish military order from the map if Spain was targeted and a unit from a military order was adjacent. The active player may not be awarded a card draw if no cards are left to be drawn. The target power must always try and award one of these 4 awards for each hit. Picking an award of no benefit to the active player is not permitted if another selection is available. If more than one hit is scored on the same piracy action, the target player must divide the hits as equally as possible between valid awards. If the piracy is by corsairs, record any victory points on the track on the Muslim player card until a maximum of 12 have been recorded, and that's this chart here. If piracy VP are earned by naval squadrons and or naus, place a 1 victory point piracy marker on your player card for each victory point earned. You can earn a maximum of 6 of these. The Muslim can get these in addition to what they get from their corsairs. And now, an equally large thing for piracy on the exploration map. If you have a naus in an ocean zone where the other player owns a settlement, you can spend 2 CP on initiate piracy. Somehow, I mean, that's the same cost, right? You declare piracy. You declare here now is in an ocean zone. It is initiating piracy against another player. Wordy, wordy, wordy. The targeted player must control a settlement adjacent to it. One of the naus player powers does not need to be at war with a power of the targeted player to initiate the piracy. The only restriction is that France cannot initiate piracy on the exploration map against any power if France is at war with the North Africans. I don't know why. Each power may only initiate piracy in a given ocean zone once per turn. You get one of their piracy markers in the zone. And then, again, piracy markers are used to enforce these per-turn limits. Each ocean zone can be targeted by no more than 2 players. Each player is limited to 3 piracy actions per turn spread across both. Again, they're just cut and pasting stuff and moving it. It could have been combined into one role, I think, to save space. Is this more understandable? Again, if you're looking it up, maybe. It really maybe is. And that's the problem with being incredibly verbose, is that although it bloats the rules and makes it harder to understand as you're reading, as a reference, it is actually really useful to have everything copied. It is hard to maintain rules in good standing under those cases, because if you change something in one, you got to link it to everything else. The target player computes the dice they get, 1 for each settlement in this ocean that has a fortress, 1 for each naval squadron in the ocean zone, 2 dice as defenders. Remember, your naval squadrons can't port at settlements, so okay. But they're worth less in the ocean zones. The 2 dice as defender is not present here. So you get a bonus just for him for being the defender in piracy on the rest of the world of 2 dice. Again, you roll dice. 5s or 6s are hits. 2 or more hits will remove the pirating now from the game. 1 hit will eliminate the now if it was damaged when piracy was initiated. If 1 hit is scored against an undamaged now, flip its counter. Losses are not well defined here in terms of if I'm the pirate, like the 2 or more hits remove the pirating now from the game. I think you're only allowed 1. Yeah, you can only use 1 for it. Okay. If the now remains in the ocean zone after step 3, and remember, you're getting 2 dice against you no matter what, so there's a fair chance you're not going to. The active player will roll for piracy. You get a number of dice equal to the now's piracy rating. Each now has its own exploration and piracy values. If the now initiating piracy is damaged, or there is only 1 settlement controlled by the target player in the ocean zone. 2, if it's not damaged and there is more than 1 settlement controlled by the target in the ocean zone. You roll the piracy dice. 5s and 6s are hits. For each hit, you choose the targeted player must choose one of the following: eliminate a naval squadron in or adjacent to the ocean. Has to actually be in to defend, but it can be just adjacent to be hit. Allow the active player to draw at random and keep a resource from one of the target player's settlements in the ocean zone. If the target player rolled at least one die for the presence of a fortress, the owner chooses the resource from all his available settlements rather than being subjected to a random draw, so you can give garbage. Award the active player with 1 victory point for piracy. Place a piracy VP marker on the appropriate space. You can get 6 of these from the award. You can't. The active player may not be awarded a resource draw if no resources are owned by the target player in the ocean zone. The target power must always try and award one of these 3 awards for each hit. Picking an award of no benefit is not permitted if another selection is available. If more than 1 hit is scored, you must divide them as equally as possible among valid. The resources earned are placed underneath the pirating nows counter. Undamaged nows can carry 2 resources. Damaged ones can only carry 1. If after receiving resources in step 5 and combining them with any resources received by the now and earlier, I don't know what that combining means. I think it's just stack under and you're only allowed to carry 2 resources. Like if you get a 2 CP and another 2 CP, I don't think you'll hunt around for a 4 CP to put under there. But yeah, feels a little weird. The total number exceeds the storage capacity of the now. The owning player chooses which excess resources are discarded. Okay, so this is a little weird, right? Up here, it says the active player is not permitted, picking an award of no benefit to the active player is not permitted if another selection is available. But here, it sounds like you can choose to give them more resources than they can carry, and they get to dump them overboard or whatever. Probably not the best thing for you, but I mean, the best for you, giving away victory points is fine, right? And especially early in the game, it makes sense to do that because you're trying to protect your own resources rather than prevent other people from getting victory points. As the victory points maybe, somebody becomes a bunny, jumps out to the lead, then it becomes a different issue. Okay, possible return home. The now can now choose to return home immediately. If this option is chosen, add the now's resources to the player's warehouse and place the now on the turn track for future turns. If the now chooses to stay in the ocean zone, it must wait for a future piracy attempt or the winter phase to have another opportunity to return home, or it can use naval movement to reach the built now box from zone 1. In the latter case, the now is only moved to the turn track if it's carrying a resource, otherwise it remains in the box for future use. Okay. I need more coffee. I'll be back. Exploration, a big part of this game. Ocean zones in the exploration map are considered unexplored, and each player must attempt to explore them using the Terra Incognita table whenever they enter an unexplored zone with a now. In addition, you must survive a navigation check whenever you attempt to cross a hazardous passage. Nows with a higher crew rating have a better chance to succeed on these rolls. A now moving into an already explored ocean zone skips the Terra Incognita table, but still has to make a navigation check if they enter a zone across a hazardous passage. I thought the arrows are the hazardous. Oh no, the hazardous passage is the Cape Town. Well, we'll see. And I think the crossing of the red line there, but I'm not sure. Okay. Follow the procedure listed below when the now enters an ocean zone. Again, going to be done like a recipe. Check for hazardous passage. If the now moves through a hazardous passage arrow, must survive one navigation check for each arrow it crosses. Repeat step 2 with each arrow. If you control 5 or more Canary Islands, you skip the navigation checks for now traveling between Zone 1 and Zone A in either direction. Now, it looks to me like there's 2 arrows there, right? So, I think that's particularly nasty. Makes sense. Okay. I guess. It looks like there's an arrow between everything except this then. So there's always going to be a navigation check. Oh no, there's not one here. Okay. And there's not one going through here. All right, all right. But it's a big deal to be able to skip 2 arrows going between 1 and A. Roll 2 dice and add the now's crew rating and the applicable modifiers listed below under the table. And then use the modified die roll on the navigation table, which is copied onto the charts, of course. So you're going to need, you know, a decent sized roll. Now the nows have nice values. Vasco da Gama, who's going to be one of the best, Columbus, another of the best, have a 3 bonus to them. But they can still sink. So, you know, exploration is going to be risky. If you're benefiting from maritime technology, you have this little marker and you get a +1. In winter, now returning to the built nows box gets a +2. I don't know if you're moving through anything for that though. That may just be a +2 to come from anywhere on the map back home. In winter, if there are 2 of your nows staying in an ocean zone, you get a +1. And we'll see the special rules about all that. If the now is damaged, flip it to the damaged side. If it was already damaged, it'll be sunk. Remove the sunk one to the turn track, in which it can be rebuilt in a future turn. Terra Incognita. If the now was not sunk by the required navigation check, but is sailing into an ocean zone that has not yet been explored by their player, it must pass a Terra Incognita exploration check. Roll 2 dice and add the now's crew rating and the applicable modifiers listed below the table. Use the modified die roll as a result. And again, it's even uglier, okay? But if you get at 11 or higher, you get a cartography victory point marker here. Now, how do we know who's been to what zones? I don't know yet. I don't see any counters that deal with that. Of course, you could use control markers. But other than that, I don't think there are any markers in the game that indicate that you've been someplace. So it may just be you're supposed to just remember. I probably can't do that. We'll see. I mean, there's only 4 players, and technically you should kind of have an idea of how far somebody's gone in any given direction. There aren't a lot of spaces there, but whatever. If this is, and if you have the cartography from that space, you know that you've been there. If this is first of all, you get +1 from the maritime technology again. If this is a Muslim now traveling into zones 1, 2, 3, A, B, and the Muslim has control of Quetta or controlled Gibraltar before the Muli Hassan seizes Sahara event was played. Great. Quetta is here, Gibraltar, of course, here. Tangier does not help you, though, somehow. Okay, result. Okay, this is the star on sunk. Result, no effect, do not advance. The player has played, if the player has played experienced pilot during the turn, so they don't get sunk. Apply the Terra Incognita result. If a sunk or damaged result occurs, apply these same effects as in step 2. If the damaged result does not sink the now, return it to the ocean zone from which it started the move. If the now receives either a successful exploration result, advance it to that zone and add a control marker from the player to this zone as a reminder that it's been explored. Okay, so they do tell you. I didn't remember that. Use a North African control for the Muslims. Place 1 VP cartography marker on the player's card if the appropriate result was obtained and any of the markers from that zone are still available. You're only allowed 1 per zone, I believe. If a player moves several, like, you can't collect both the cartographies from a given zone. I think there was we'll see, it'll be here. If a player moves several nows from the same ocean zone to a single adjacent and unexplored zone, the owner decides which now rolls on the Terra Incognita table. If successful, the other nows move immediately into the newly explored zone along with the successful one. However, if unsuccessful, the other nows must remain in the original ocean zone until a new naval move action is undertaken. Note that navigation checks may not be linked in this fashion. Each now makes its own navigation check when it crosses a hazardous passage, and most of the passages are hazardous. Hugging the coast of Africa is safe. That's pretty much it. Pretty close to it. If a player successfully explored an ocean zone but failed to get the 1 VP marker for cartography, then, if such a VP is still available, a subsequent attempt to earn it may be attempted. An attempt may be attempted. Great. To do so, the player uses the naval movement of a now in that ocean zone to roll on the cartography table instead of to move. And then you roll on a special cartography-only table, which is less likely to hurt you, but it's still not good. +1 from maritime, +1 for the Muslims under the same conditions, +1 for a Sea Dog event. Now I thought the Sea Dogs were Brits, but yeah, I don't know. +1 if you have any naval escort squadrons. Again, different. But again, the experienced pilot prevents you from taking any bad effects from the cartography table. Founding settlements. And now in an ocean zone where there is a vacant exploration map space, these things, may enter this vacant space and found a settlement. The active player moves the now to the turn track to re-enter play in a future turn and places a settlement counter in their color on the exploration map space. The now has been dismantled to serve as an initial stockade. Draw a naval resource from the pool and place it face down on the space as well. The active player is free to examine the resource, and he might get it back in the winter. Or if he can get another now there. A maximum of 1 settlement can be established in each ocean zone in a single impulse. Across all players? I guess. I don't know. A settlement may only be created if additional settlement counters for your player remain in the counter mix. Once established settlements cannot be moved later in the game, although they may occasionally be lost due to events. And I guess you can rebuild them because ocean zones 1 and 2 each contain a space that is Portuguese color instead of gray. That's those two. These spaces are reserved exclusively for Portuguese settlements. Other players can take control of them only if settlement surrenders or without previous declaration is played against a Portuguese settlement in one of those spaces. Whenever the Portuguese is creating a new settlement in a zone with empty reserved Portuguese spaces, remembering the limitations of turn 1 and 2, he must select these before any gray ones. All right, special exploration events. Let's call out stuff that's in the cards. These special cards control the pace of exploration map discoveries. All right, overseas voyages. On the exploration map, Naus may not. We're already getting into special rules again. This is all card-based special rules, but we haven't gotten through the core of the game yet. These are just embedded. On the exploration map, Naus may not move into the new world spaces A, B, 7, or 8. Or the Indian Ocean, zones 4, 5, and 6, until the mandatory event Overseas Voyages has been played. Note that these boundaries are marked on the map with red lines to remind the players that they are not transversable. It's interesting that this is only a 1 arrow. That was hard to make. Not as hard as the other, but it was hard to make compared to... Well, no, compared to all of this. Okay. Like, the Columbus voyage was particularly fortuitous when it comes down to it, even though they almost died on it. Note that these boundaries are marked on the map with red lines and are not transversable. Portugal and Spain may also be limited in their movement by the terms of the Peace of Alcasovas and the Treaty of Tordesillas. When the Overseas Voyages event has been played, add Christopher Columbus's now in Ocean Zone 1 and Vasco da Gama's now in Ocean Zone 3. Presumably, You've explored your way down to Ocean Zone 3. 1 is easy. If when this event is played, the Spanish and Portuguese player have not explored zones 1 through 3 respectively, place these nows in the ocean zone nearest their intended entry position. Or if zone 1 has not been explored, in the built nous box. These special nous do not count against the usual limit of 2 nous per player on the exploration map. Vasco da Gama's and Columbus's nous are only available by way of the Overseas Voyages event, and they're particularly good. If dismantled to found a settlement or sunk, remove them from the game. Both nous may never be captured at any time by the boarding and capture response card. All right. Christopher Columbus now enjoys the following special properties. On Columbus's first attempt to explore Zone A, reduce the number of navigation checks required from 2 to 1. Control of the 5 Canary Islands reduces this to 0. Now, if we look at the 5 Canary Islands rule, you skip all navigation checks. So it reduces to 0 on its own, which is not what I thought. I thought, when I saw this, I thought they each were a -1, but no, remembering that. A terra incognita roll, though, is still required as usual. If Spain becomes the first player to found a settlement in Zone 7 using Columbus's now, Spain earns a special 2 VP, give them the Overseas Voyages marker, representing Columbus's arrival in the New World. If it's another power that does this, or if Spain does it with a different now, they get 1 VP for Overseas Voyages instead. So you have this kind of interesting choice. Do you keep this really good Columbus piece? Not good at piracy, but... Or, you know... Do you take 2 victory points? And victory points are pretty valuable, but it takes a lot of them to win the game. Vasco da Gama's now has a similar property. On his first attempt to explore Zone 4, no navigation check is required at all. A terra incognita still has to be made. If Portugal becomes the first player to found a settlement in Zone 5, all the way over here, using Vasco da Gama's now, Portugal earns 2 victory points. Give them the Overseas Voyage marker, representing Vasco da Gama's arrival in India. If it's another power that does it, or Portugal does it with a different now, they gain 1 instead. And it's a one-time thing. If you pass on it and use a different now, you will not get the 2 points for it. Whoever does it first will get 1. Christopher Columbus discovers the New World and Vasco da Gama arrives in India. These are cards. They allow Spain and Portugal to gain the full 2 overseas VP, regardless of progress they've made towards these goals to date. To play either of these 2 events, you have to have a now on the map or in the built nous box and have a vacant space to place a settlement in the target zone. Both events can be played even before the Overseas Voyages mandatory event is played. Execute these events by taking as many of these steps as possible. If Spain or Portugal has not yet received the appropriate 2 VP marker, award it to them now. If they've already achieved a 1 VP, they get a 2. So there is a way around it. Okay. Move a now directly to the target zone. Now make the exploration roll for terra incognita in that zone, if that zone is unexplored, considering any result less than a 9 as a 9, which is successful but no cartography bonus. Bonus! Found a settlement by removing the now as usual. Add the marker for this event to the corresponding ocean zone to show that this power receives a +1 die roll modifier to the return of any resources from that ocean zone. I don't know if that's a one-time thing or if that is if that's going to be forever. In which case, these cards are better than than doing it manually. Seville Inland River Port. Up here, it's got that little thing there. No naval unit can move from the Gulf of Cadiz sea zone to Seville unless the power controls Jerez. Oh, sorry, probably Jerez. Or is allied to a power that controls Jerez and allows you to pass that. Or is allied to a power that controls Jerez that allows you to pass through. I think that's actually worded wrong. I think they can do either one, but I'm not positive. Like, being allied automatically allows movement through an enemy's territory. I think you're allowed to give passage without being allied, but I have to look that up. I don't think that's a big issue. I think if somebody else controls it other than Spain, or somebody else controls Cadiz other than Spain, there's probably a war going on. Naval transport, a power performing naval transport through the Gulf of Cadiz may move directly from Seville to the Gulf of Cadiz for just 1 CP, but again, only if they have access through Jerez. An assault may not be conducted against Seville if the besieged power in the space controls Jerez. Right. For the same reason you can't assault a port with a ship in it. Exception, an assault may still be conducted if the assaulting player plays the event card Treachery. More assault. If a power besieged in Seville has naval squadrons in that space, to meet naval blockade requirements from the Gulf of Cadiz, the attacker must also control Jerez or be allied to a power that is granting access. Piracy. Seville can be the object of piracy attempts only if the power that controls Jerez is either the same power that's initiating piracy or the power that allows passage, or that power allows passage through Jerez for the piracy attempt. Kind of weird. I don't know. Construction. There's a number of actions that allow you to construct land units, naval units, naus, fortresses. New units must be constructed using one of your power's home spaces that is currently under your control. Exception, mercenary militias, unexpected reinforcements, and some home cards allow units to be built in other non-home friendly spaces or a non-friendly space that contains your units. Also, the send escort action allows a naval squadron to be constructed and directly placed in an ocean zone. Units may never be constructed in a space with unrest or plague. The force pool is absolute. The Muslims have, well, a lot of people have militia on the other side of units. The Muslims have corsairs on the other side of their ships. They have to consider this, and you're not going to be allowed to just withdraw units from the board to make things work. I'm wondering where we're going to start. I actually think we've got quite a few pages left, so we're not going to be stopping anytime soon. Because, see, royal weddings is kind of a special rule, all having to do with the Spaniards. So that's probably about where we end this video. And it's going to be a long one again too, right? Okay, land units. Land units can be constructed. Do they show me here? Okay, so this is really interesting. They do not show, like here they show a picture of all the different units in the game basically, and their color schemes. You know what they don't show? They don't show the bowmen. Once again, the bowmen are not present. Now, I think they're the stuff from here and not the Ottomans, because I think there's just 3 Ottoman units, which are also bowmen for some reason. Anyway, whatever. Land units. The Moriscos are Nasrid regulars that are only recruited for play under the Morisco Uprising event. Time for special rules. The military orders are Spanish regulars only created by the Cardinal Cisneros region. France and Portugal may also construct units on a foreign war card when one is in if one is in progress that allows them. Here's some of the nations again. Oh, look, the Catalonians have bows too. But they don't look like they look like medievals. Regulars. All powers spend 2 CPs on the recruit regular infantry action. This allows them to add a regular to the map for each action taken. Militias only cost 1 CP each. They have this black thing. Add 1 militia to the map for each action taken. Guanches are considered militia for cost purposes. I don't know what the fuck they are otherwise. And on their other side, they have other numbers. Siege artillery. Aragon and France can spend 3 on recruit artillery. Add 1 siege artillery to the map. Cavalry. Costs 3 each to add cav to the map. And yes, The camels count as regular cav, as do these ones with like one guy running in front of another is what it looks like to me. Really does. I mean, it really does. I knowing it's a horse, I can almost see it, but not quite. Yeah. Naval units can be built in any friendly home port. Okay. Land units can be constructed in any friendly home space that is not occupied, with the exceptions that I may or may not have said something about. Naval units can be built in any friendly home port that is not occupied by enemies. Naval units lost in combat or assaults cannot be rebuilt on the turn they were eliminated. They go on the turn track and then can come back and would be rebuilt at cost. Naval squadrons cost 2 CPs on the build at naval squadron action. And you add one in the thing. Corsairs only cost 1. Naval escort squadrons, power that has explored an ocean, may spend 1 CP on the build naval escort squadron to build a naval squadron in any explored ocean zone. No navigation roll is required. So it costs 2 CPs to build a naval squadron at home, but if you want to build it in the middle of the ocean, or build it at home and sail it out to the ocean, it only costs you 1. I'm not sure why. It feels like this is more complex than this, because I think it can come back. Not positive. If it can't come back, it's fine. Because what it means is you've got a smaller, a much smaller fleet out in the new world, which makes perfect sense. But I think they can come back and like operate as squadrons later. Not sure. Maybe they go on the turn track if they try that. All right, starting on turn 3, all powers can spend 2 CPs on the build now action. Randomly draw a now counter from your force and add it to the map in the built now box on the undamaged side. Portugal is allowed to build 2 on turn 1 and 2 on other ones on turn 2. Portugal is the only power that can build nows before turn 3. If the School of Sagres Henry the Navigator event has been played, these construction restrictions per turn increase to 3. Normally, you can only build 1. By the way, they're randomly drawn, but I'm assuming not Columbus and Vasco da Gama. I have 2 cups already assigned to the resources, so I'll just roll a die or something for them. A maximum of 2 nows are allowed on the exploration map from the same player. Exception: Columbus or Vasco da Gama come into play from the Overseas Voyage event. These special nows do not count against this limit. There are no limits to the number of nows a player may have in the built nows box up there. If you have 2 nows on the exploration map, you may not move another from the built nows box to the map unless you voluntarily remove your other nows from the map. One of your other. Now, this is different from the rest of the game where you can't remove pieces, like to make room for other stuff you're building, but with nows, I guess you can just say they're lost at sea or something. I don't know. When a now is removed from the map for any reason, placed it on the next turn of the turn track. Copy editor. During the card draw phase, these eliminated now units are returned to the pool of nows available to be constructed. Fortresses. Any player with fortresses available on their player card can spend 2 CP on build fortress settlement, or 3 CP for build fortress main map action. Fortresses may be constructed in any controlled simple home space on the main map that is not occupied by the enemy, or an existing fortress marker, and has no unrest or plague markers. Fortresses may also be built on the exploration map in settlements created by the active player that do not yet have a fortress marker. In either case, remove a fortress from your player card and place it on the settlement. Remember, you get those back. That's just your limit per turn, basically. Winter phase. Oh, do we want to do this? This is going to be long. This runs us several pages, so we are going to hold. We'll be back with that later. Okay, wow, this did not charge as well as I thought it would. Or I thought it had. The winter phase. This is kind of the cleanup at the end of each turn. You resolve specific mandatory events if they haven't occurred. Check military order activity against corsairs and loss of Nazrid home spaces. This is just a list of stuff we're going to be hitting. Discard unused resources, remove loaned naval unit markers, return land units home, including checks for plague and disbanding of militia, placement of replacements, and effects from the Morisco Uprising, return of Naus and naval units, return of, and I think this is the naval units that are on the rest of the board. And again, I think they return. Maybe they just go to the turn track and you got to rebuild them. Return of naval resources, caravans, French Mesta and Ragusa trade. It all sounds like special stuff, right? Like some of the special rules. And again, it mostly is, but you know. Remove major power alliance markers and piracy markers from the sea and ocean. Remember, these are both things that are tracked just for one turn. Alliances go away at the end of a turn, unlike wars. So you got to reformulate them each turn. Piracy markers are just there to let you know you can't pirate in certain areas. Reset diplomatic status of minors that were resolved in this turn to their starting levels. That's going to be this. Things that got resolved get reset to wherever they are right now, which is just sort of, you know, the affinity that those countries have for each other. Mandatory events. There's a whole list of events that must occur by a specific due date. If it's the winter phase of the indicated turn and the event hasn't been triggered, you resolve the event at the time in the order indicated. The card is extracted from the deck and removed from play as if it had been played by one of the powers. Nobody gets the 3 CPs for playing it. It just triggers this and brings it into play. So at turn 1, for example, Sixtus IV shows up as the new pope, and whatever rules apply for him are going to apply. I'm not going to go through the list, but whatever. Okay. Military order activity against corsairs and loss of Nazrid home spaces. The Spanish player rolls as many dice as spaces he controls from the following list that contain at least one military order unit. Yeah, and, I mean, this is pure special rolls, right? Badis, Melilla, Oran, Bahia, and Algiers. I think that's Badis, Melilla, Oran, and Algiers. It's the ports in the North Africa. And that's what you have to remember. Each 5 or 6 is a hit that reduces the Muslim player's Corsair piracy victory point track by 1 space, but not less than 0. They didn't have to gain them this turn. You're just doing damage, you know, to their capabilities or something. Next, if Spain and the Nazrids are at war, check if any Nazrid home spaces are controlled by Spain and thus lose its property as a Nazrid home space. You remove the special control marker, which has the little Muslim writing on it, with a regular Spanish one. Okay. Discard unused resources. If you have any resources in your warehouse that you were not able to spend, they go away. Loaned naval unit markers. All the loaned markers are removed. The fleets will return to a port controlled by their owning player in the following step, not to a port controlled by the power to which they've been on loan. Remember, when you loan something, it sails off and joins the other fleet, so it's not a big deal in terms of that. If a now or naval squadron has been captured by rivals, it remains in the possession of the capturing power. Okay. I don't remember capture being a possibility. Now I need to look at the naval combat rules, because I just don't remember that happening. This will be in the action phase somewhere, right? Presumably under naval combat. Huh. I don't see any capture there. I see destruction. I don't see capture here under the piracy tables. Don't know how that happens. I don't feel like I've run into that role, but I don't know. Maybe it's a card. Who knows? Return of land units. Land units return to the fortified spaces, although if they're in plagues or if they're militia, they may be eliminated. Count the number of land and naval units, but not leaders, that you have in a space with a plague marker. Roll that many dice. For each one, you eliminate a unit of your choice from that space. Then roll a die for each leader in the space. If you roll a 1, the leader becomes sick and retreats to quarantine. Place the leader on the turn track to return 2 turns beyond the current turn. Otherwise, they would be coming back right away if it was 1 turn. If due to the effect of a mandatory event, the leader affected by plague dies and is replaced by another, the new leader replacing it is not sick. Remove the plague markers from the board. Disbanding militia. We're going to have to stop right after that to swap batteries, I think. Now check for each player whether any militia are disbanded. Militia located in the Canary Islands, on a foreign war card, in a formation with a leader, or in a home key never disband. Count the number of militia that you control that do not meet these criteria. Roll that many dice. For each one of your eligible militia, your choice, is removed from the map and returned to your force pool. Okay, we can go a little further. Land units in either unfortified spaces or fortified spaces not controlled by their major power must return to a fortified space that is controlled by their power, with a limit of 4 per space except in home keys. Land units already in fortified spaces controlled by their power that are not home keys have the option of returning to a home key. They don't talk about the limit of 4 there, so I don't know. Land units already in a home key are the only ones that are prohibited from moving during this phase. All of the land units have at least an option to move. There are 4 exceptions. 1 land unit may remain in each controlled strategic space, even if it's not fortified. Land units in the Canaries may remain there if desired, even if in non-controlled spaces. After the mandatory event Death of Ferrante of Naples has occurred, additional land units may remain in Atella and L'Aquila. I'm going to be somewhere down here. There's Atella. There's L'Aquila. Okay, whatever. If the Ottoman Seas Otranto mandatory event is played, additional land units may remain in Otranto. There's the fortress now at the edge. Attrition. Land units move according to the procedure listed below. Do you really have to tell me that? All land units moving between the same 2 spaces are moved as a stack. Check for an open path of any length of adjacent land spaces or sea zones from the stack's current location to its destination. To avoid losing units to attrition, all spaces must be friendly controlled and free of unrest. Unlike determination of LOC, enemy units are ignored at this time. In addition, paths can be traced over any number of sea zones without a friendly naval unit being present. Because alliances are in effect until the end of the step 18-9, land units may trace a path through spaces controlled by allied players powers. If no such path exists, the stack suffers attrition, losing half its units on the way home. All right, we're going to have to swap batteries, and then we'll get on to more. Okay. Each power performs the following steps to check statuses of all its land units. Check stacking violation. Review all land units that are stacked in fortified spaces other than a home key. For each such fortified space that contains more than 4, the power must return the access to a controlled home key. So, yeah. Before I said, yeah, it doesn't look like you have to leave your home space, but yeah, you got to do this. For each such fortified space that contains more than 4, you must return the access to a controlled home key. Minor power units could also optionally return to a minor power home key. Artillery and cav are always counted against this limit of 4 units. Other land units in these spaces also have the option of returning to a home key or a minor key for minors, if desired, even if not overstacked. The stack takes attrition if its path must cross over or end on a space in unrest or not under friendly control. Plague has already been removed. Return units. Now review all land units in unfortified spaces and in fortified spaces not controlled by their major power. Remember that one unit may remain in each strategic space. These units must either return to a home key or return to the nearest fortified space. You can split a stack at this time, choosing to move some units to one space and the rest to the nearest fortified space and returning the rest to a home key. If more than one fortified space is nearest, you can move to each of those spaces as long as the limit of 4 per is there. Return army units, army leaders. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble making words. If a space contains an army leader is vacated during this procedure, the army leader must either accompany one of the land units leaving the space or return to a controlled home key. Leaders never suffer attrition. Moreover, if they're alone, they can always return to a controlled home key regardless of whether or not they have an LOC. There are 6 exceptions to the rules in this procedure. Great. Enemy-controlled keys. If a power's home key is currently controlled by an enemy power, none of its land units may be returned to that key. If a power does not have any home keys, all units that would normally have been required to return to a home key are eliminated. You got nowhere else you can go. Spanish units. The Spanish control 2 powers, Aragon and Castile. The units of each power may return to their own home spaces. However, there are 3 exceptions. Castilian units may return to Aragonese home spaces in Sicily or Sardinia as if they were Castilian. Units of both powers returning as part of a formation with Ferdinand or the Great Captain may winter in the other power's home space. Units of either power may winter in fortified or strategic spaces controlled by the Spanish player that's not a home space of either power, because there's no way to distinguish them. Muslims. The Muslims control 3 nations, of which 2 of them are one power, the North African Alliance, which is the Berbers and the Sultanate. They share a force pool of units. See, that doesn't sound like it's the archers, but you add a bunch of units to the board. But here's the thing, these fucking archers don't have militia on the other side. So again, still haven't been able to figure out what they really are. Card-wise, I think there's one card that adds Ottoman units, and that's the 3 with the X. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe those are all Ottomans. That would make sense, but there was something that says you add force pool to the North African Alliance. So I just don't know. And no clue within the rules, picture-wise. Lots of pictures. The one thing that I did not understand is that. And, you know, they could clear it all up by putting the words underneath the counter to tell you what nation they are, just like the miners do. No reason they couldn't have done that. Well, you know, it's not like, you know, there's tons of information on the counters and it would clutter them up or anything. There's a picture, a color, and a number, and that's it. Oh, where are we? They share a force pool, although the spaces on the map are different color. North African units may return to any North African controlled space. Nazrid units must always return to Nazrid. Now the Nazrids are those kind of darker olive green, and they're this. So they're clear. North African units in a formation with a Nazrid leader may return to a Nazrid controlled space. French and Catalonians. French units may return to Catalan-controlled fortified spaces in the Principality of Catalonia, but French units returning to Barcelona may not exceed 1 valid formation. That's the key. Is it the only key? I think so. Catalan units may not return to a French home space except in formation with the Anjou leader. Catalan units may return to the following Aragon home spaces if they possess a French control marker and are fortified: Girona, Palmos, and Tarragona, which may... Girona is fortified, Palmos is not, Tarragona is not, but counters could be placed on them for fortresses. Catalan units may return to spaces with French control markers in Roussillon. Catalan and French units can winter in home strategic spaces controlled by the other in either Catalonia or Aragon Is that the one per, or is this something more general? I'm assuming it's the one per, okay? Portuguese in Beltranejos. Portuguese units can return to a fortified home space in Beltranejos faction. In the case of Beltranejos home keys, Portuguese units may not exceed one valid formation. Beltranejos units may never return to any space controlled by Portugal. Portugal can winter in strategic spaces controlled by Beltranejos. Again, same. Once the peace of Alcacovas has been signed, the Portuguese units may no longer return to Beltranejos-controlled spaces, as they are no longer allies. Otranto, L'Aquila, and Atella. These three spaces in southern end of Italy are each marked with a small colored square to remind players of their winter phase capabilities. Got a red here, a blue here, a green here. I think that's the power that has the special capability, but let's see. If the mandatory event Ottomans take Otranto has been played, a North African formation whose size is determined by the command value of a single leader may winter in Otranto. Even though it's not a key, it can exceed the 4, I guess. Again, weirdness here, weirdness. But a force without a leader can be 4 units, so I'm assuming it can, since the leadership will always exceed, it can be there. If the mandatory event Death of Ferrante of Naples has been played, a French formation whose size is determined by a leader may winter in L'Aquila. If the mandatory event Death of Ferrante of Naples, let's use as many words as we can to fill this. A Spanish formation can be in Atella. If the appropriate event has occurred but no leader is present, up to 4 units may winter there. That's the size of a formation. You didn't have to specify. Replacements and the Morisco Uprising. Each major power, including Catalonia and Beltranejos, adds one regular of their choice to their choice of home key that's controlled and not in unrest. Remember that the regular received by North African Alliance can be placed in any Fez or Berber's home key in play, with the following list of exceptions. Nasrid can choose to receive a cavalry in place of a regular. Any major power controlling Tunis, as long as the Algiers Regency has not been played, receives the Jerba Corsair if it had been sunk. The North African Alliance also receives a Corsair in Algiers if he controls this space. The Algiers Regency event has been played and an unbuilt Corsair is available. Okay, that's a whole bunch of conditions. Any major power that has surrendered other than the Beltranejos, Catalonia, Nasrid will receive 1 militia instead of a regular in a controlled, fortified, or strategic space of their choice that is valid for winter stacking purposes. Surrender doesn't seem to be much. It seems to be that you only get a militia, as far as I can tell. Like, you don't leave the war or anything like that. You're still at war. You're just technically surrendered for whatever it matters. If any Morisco or regular unit or Morisco Uprising marker is in play, the Muslim player executes the effects of Morisco Uprising, another special rule. All right. Naus and naval units return. Naus on the exploration map are returned to either one of their power settlements or the built Naus box, or they can risk remaining at sea. You can return a Nau to any of your own settlements if it is closest to the Nau's current ocean zone and there are no navigation arrows between those two zones. A settlement can hold a maximum of 1. You can voluntarily return a Nau with or without a resource directly to the built Naus box. Roll a navigation check for the Nau on a +2 to the die roll, which is good. Place the Nau in the built Naus box. If it has no resource, if it has at least 1 resource, the resource goes to the warehouse and the Nau is placed on the turn track. Now note, you lost your resources back here. So this is a resource available for you next turn. If the Nau chooses to stay in its current ocean zone, it must pass a navigation check. This check is done with a +1 if the Nau belongs to a group of at least 2 Naus of the same power trying to stay in the ocean zone. I guess, like, they tie their ships together so that they can hold on and survive easier. I don't know. Each now must roll separately. Exception, on the turn of overseas voyages, Vasco da Gama's and Christopher Columbus's naus do not perform navigation checks if they decide to stay in their ocean zone. Naval units return. Naval units on the main map must be placed in the nearest port controlled by their major power. Squadrons of a controlled minor power have the option to go to the nearest home port of that minor power instead, as long as it is under control of their major power. If more than one port is the same distance away, the owning player selects equidistant, splitting the stack if they wish. Naval units returning home at this time cannot be intercepted, do not fight naval combat, never suffer attrition, and may return to a port that was under siege at the start of the phase. Which may break the siege. Well, the units had to leave the fortress. You can't keep something under siege between turns. Which is weird because turns are not a year. Like, turns are longer than a year, so it's not really winter. Right? Turns are like 6 years each. So this faces a problem that I've called out in a few games, notably like, it's not over there. I think something called God Kings or whatever. Over here somewhere. Wow. I don't know where it is. That's it, I think. Warfare in the early civilization. That had like it's a Bronze Age type game. That had a weird situation where like turns are every 5 years. But strangely, every 5 years you have this weird cycle where you have to go home. To me, it makes sense that you have to go home at winter time. It doesn't really make sense that winter only happens every several years. But such is. There's a level of abstraction there that I do not like, but where are we? Reminder that you cannot pass from Alboran Sea to the Gulf of Cadiz unless you control one of the three spaces in the Strait of Gibraltar. An ally controls one or one of those powers has allowed you to pass through. See how it's worded differently here? And this is weird because, again, you could set sail from here through an assuming the rules are right. I may just neglect this, but you could set sail from somewhere in the Med to get through here onto the main, onto the rest of the world map without having to meet those conditions, which I think is probably an error in the rules. And I may just treat it as such if I can remember. The way this is, remember you cannot pass, if you can't make it home through them, look, you shouldn't be able to make it through there to go exploring from like wherever. If there's no valid port for a naval squadron to return to, it's eliminated, and I guess goes on the turn track. I don't know for the next turn. A naval squadron acting as an escort on the exploration map must choose between staying in its ocean zone, attempting to return to a home port, a controlled home port on the main map. To return, it makes its navigation check with a +3 modifier, which is pretty good. Damage will block the transfer. The unit remains in the ocean zone. I guess it doesn't actually take any loss. Sunk kills it. Okay, so remember, I could build a naval squadron and move it onto the rest of the world map for 1 point. But building a naval squadron and not moving it cost me 2. And now I am returning it to the main map. It's a full-size naval squadron on the European map now. There's no way of like bullshitting around and saying, yeah, that wasn't a full naval squadron. It's, it could be smaller because it's out there where there aren't big ships. And it's only cost me 1 to build it. It did something on the rest of the world, and somehow it became as valuable as the thing I spent 2 for. Don't know why. Maybe you're getting hazardous negative pay or something to the crew and to the builders and whatnot. I have no idea. Right. Okay, remember that the naval escort segment of the spring deployment, you can move one squadron without a navigation check. Yeah, but there you're moving a squadron that presumably cost you 2. I don't know. Anyway. Do we have to swap yet? We're getting awfully close, and I'm not going to make it to royal weddings. Return of naval resources. Determine whether the naval resources placed in settlements arrive at their owner's warehouse by rolling on the resource return table. You make one roll for each ocean zone where you have at least one naval resource in a settlement. You must select the appropriate column according to whether or not the fleet is subject to plunder. Add the following, which is a rule over here. Add the following modifiers to that roll. +2 if you have a naval escort in that ocean. Now you've just had your option to return that naval escort. Doesn't have to roll to stay though, unlike the nows. If you're benefiting from maritime technology, 1. Ocean Zone 5, if you're Portugal and you have Vasco da Gama has arrived in India, you get a bonus. Ocean Zone 7, Spain, and Christopher Columbus has discovered the New World. Free of plunder, subject to plunder, and then caravans have their own column on here. And they can be eliminated, they can arrive in your warehouse, or they could be stuck where they are. Okay. And if it's plundered, you add a randomly chosen resource from those in the ocean zone to the plundering player's warehouse. They go straight to the warehouse on plunder. You don't have to ship it home. On results, but maybe you do. On results of 5 to 6 or 7 to 8 for naval resources, apply the results one at a time. If there's fewer than 3 present in a zone, apply those results in the order listed from top to bottom. The random choice of a resource for plunder is always resolved first, then the player determines the status of the other returning resources. This is weird, because it says here, apply the results one at a time. I think you roll all the dice, see what columns you're on, and then randomly check your resource. If that player controls a fortress in the ocean zone being resolved, you may freely choose which resources arrive, remain, or are eliminated from those present in the zone. If they do not possess a fortress, it's randomly chosen. All right, we got to swap batteries. We'll keep going. My voice seems to be holding up, which, you know, it wasn't before I went dancing, whatever. I guess it's strengthening as I keep reading these things aloud. Plunder. A power must attempt to plunder naval resources from other players coming from settlements in ocean zones 1 to 6. That's this. If he controls 5 or more ports on the African coast between Anadir and Tangier, Anfa counts as 2 ports for this. Agadir to Tangier, Anfa counts as 2. It's got 2 port symbols, so that'll help. If any power meets this requirement, naval resources return rolls from the indicated ocean zones use the return subject to plunder. So, who might be plundering you here? Well, it's probably Portugal or the North Africans doing it. Those are the 2 who are really struggling over that area. Alrighty. If the Spanish player controls all the Canary Islands, they're never subject to plunder. Plunder of naval resources is mandatory and independent of whether the plundering power is at war, allied, or at peace with the target power. A player who has played the experienced pilot event this turn is not subject to plunder. So 1 through 6 is this stuff. That means that the Spaniards are not subject to plunder. Interesting. I did not realize that. Caravans. That's coming from these spaces. Not the overseas voyages. I think the marker goes there when it's there. Check whether caravan resources arrive at their destination. Caravans either arrive successfully, allowing the Muslim to add resources to his warehouse, or are blocked and allow an intercepting player to roll in the caravan blocked column. For caravans originating in Fez or Marrakesh, these two, that specific key must be under Muslim control, bunk, bunk, and not under siege if this is a resource returning during the action phase, and a path of controlled spaces must be traced from that key to a controlled Atlantic home port from Tangier to Agadir. The Berber caravan originating in Tlemcen, something like that, works the same way, but must instead trace a path to the Berber port space. And although they don't say it, I assume the key has to be controlled, blah, blah, blah. The same way works for me there. Each of these paths must possess a unique set of spaces not shared at any point by any of the other caravan paths. If a caravan from Fez or Marrakesh is blocked from reaching its destination, the Portuguese player rolls on the caravan blocks column and applies the result. If the Berber caravan cannot reach its destination, the Spanish player rolls. And this tells you who should be interested in doing the blockage. It doesn't matter who's doing it. And there we go. Actually, it's right here. Okay. A blocked caravan will not make it. It's just a question of whether it stays in the space or gets plundered. Okay. The French trade, the Mesta trade, and the trade with Ragusa. French Med. The France checks the success of their commerce in the Mediterranean. Control of Venice, Genoa, and Florence improve their chances, as shown on the table below. Roll 2 dice, and any resources received are immediately added to their warehouse. Here's the modifiers. North Sea. France then checks the success of their commerce in the North Sea with the Hanseatics. France can benefit from investment in commercial improvements. Once the Treaty of Etaples is signed, France gets a +1 die modifier for each trade improvement marker that they buy. They have an action that allows them to buy these. Invest in North Sea commerce. You have in the North Sea trade box as shown in the table below, roll 2 dice, blah, 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 the resources are added. Mesta. Spain now checks for trade from the Mesta. The Spanish player gets a +1 die roll for each port under Spanish control in the Cantabrian Sea, up here. To which the Spanish player can trace a line of communication from the Mesta marker. This cannot trace through another port in the Cantabrian Sea. So the Mesta marker is starting here, but it moves around, and I can shift up, and then it looks like I'm in trouble. So I will not get any bonuses to the die roll for the Mesta trade at the beginning of the game, unless I change things. If a foreign war against Brittany is active, Spain rolls twice on the table. Roll 2 dice, and the received resources are added to Spain's warehouse. Ragusa, over there. A major power controlling Ragusa rolls a die and consults the following table. For each owned naval squadron on the port of Ragusa, he gets a +1 modifier to +2, getting some resources. These are all naval resources. The caravans only come from the caravan. Once all players have received the resources due to them for the warehouse, in impulse order, each player reveals any VP resources gained and places them on their proper place on the player card. Update their VP track. Okay. And if you don't, you're going to lose them. So, resources that award CPs are placed in the warehouse to be spent during the next turn, not revealed. A resource that awards a card draw must be placed on the turn track, and a +1 card marker is added over the ruler of the appropriate player card. That additional card draw is received during the next card draw phase, which will be coming up soon. Resources that award free units are placed on the turn track. Add the corresponding units to the controlled home space according to the following priority. Keys, then fortified, then strategic. Finally, an unfortified space. All units received from resources must be taken from the force pools of the powers North Africa, Portugal, Castile, and France. If a player's force pool does not have the units of the appropriate type, the resource is lost without awarding a unit. Now, why are the things going on the turn track? I don't know. I think they come back and go back into the pool eventually. The same procedure for revealing resources applies to any naval or caravan resource drawn in any other phase in the game except these cases. Resource awards a card draw. Draw a new card from the deck immediately. Resource awards CP. These CPs may be spent by the owning player at any time during the turn, including in the impulse being resolved, assuming the impulse has not already been extended. The only use for CPs that CP resources that I'm aware of is that they allow you to extend an impulse. You can't use them, well, I mean, you can trade them away as they can be given to other players via various mechanisms. But yeah, you can't use them instead of a card play. You can only extend each impulse once. So if you get too many CP counters, you might be in trouble. I doubt it because the hand sizes are relatively large, I believe. Maybe not. 4 cards. Of course, you might be holding 2, but fuck my battery. It's being okay right now. I probably need to clean the leads again. That seems to help a little bit, but the damn thing has its issues, period, the end. Okay, where are we? We're almost there. Alliance and piracy markers. Remove all allied markers between major powers from the diplomatic status display. All alliances declared for this turn are over. Alliances with minors, though, do stay in effect. Yeah, I forgot to mention. Yeah. All right, why don't we try to finish this whole thing? Diplomacy reset. All influence markers that are in the resolve this turn space there go back to their beginning. Now I'm checking the damn thing every word or 3. Default values are showed in the colored boxes. If they don't have a default, they go to the 0 box as they're set up right now. Any -1 admin markers on player cards are removed at this time. All leaders all rulers revert to their full admin. Remember, you're able to do something funky in the headline events with those points to change your die rolls or something like that. I don't even remember what, but I remember you're able to like take minuses in terms of what you can hold. Royal Wedding, starting on turn 3, the 6th phase of the turn. And by the way, I've turned all of these upside down for now. I don't know where Manuel is. He's in here somewhere. I'm assuming. I don't know what happened to him. These are Borgia victory point markers. Yeah, I don't know where Manuel is. The fuck happened to him? There's Tom Bombadil. There's just so many fucking counters here. I don't know. Now I'm pissed off because I'm afraid I might have lost a counter. Is he on the back? No. I don't know. I swear I looked through everything. Oh well. What am I saying? Right. In the 6th phase of the turn, the Spanish player resolves all weddings he has arranged during the action phase. Ferdinand and Isabella were active in establishing alliances. This would eventually lead to Charles V. Each child of the Catholic monarchs is represented on a portrait on a Spanish-colored marker, and each suitor by a portrait on a beige-colored marker. I gotta look for Manuel. Here's what it is. I have the Manuel counter. He was over here. He could be apparently part of one of 2 different marriages. So, I'm not missing a counter. I spent a lot of time looking, and I'm like, I sorted everything out. I can't see where he could possibly be. Okay, let's keep going. Isabella here is the firstborn daughter of the Catholic monarchs, not Queen Isabella herself. Yeah, as they arrive during the card draw phase, each child or suitor is placed in a box on the royal wedding table. Note that it is indicated in the upper left corner of this portrait whether or not this royal may die. That's cute. Place Manuel in the box under Isabella if she is alive, even if married. Otherwise, add him beneath Maria. Okay. We'll end up clearing those out of there, I'm pretty sure. During the action phase, the Spanish player can spend CPs on the promote marriage action between 1 and 5. To marry off Ferdinand and Isabella's children. Each child must be married to the highest priority suitor, indicated by the proximity on this chart to the corresponding child. Example, Manuel cannot marry Isabella while Alfonso of Portugal is alive. Each CP spent represents an increase in the value for the dowry awarded, which translates to a modifier to the resolution from 0 to 4. The minimum CP required to attempt a resolution roll is 1 for 0, and the maximum is 5 for +4. It is possible to invest CP in different actions to increase an already established dowry to its maximum allowed. Several weddings may be arranged in the same turn, and each can be advanced to the full 5 CP of dowry. The male son, the heir, John, Prince of Asturias, automatically receives the full +4 dowry when just a single CP is spent on the marriage. Place the child and their suitor in the appropriate dowry box on the royal wedding table according to the number of CPs invested. And we got that table here. To resolve a wedding, when do you do this? Roll 2 dice. It doesn't say when to do this. Like I know I can promote the marriage. I assume I roll immediately. Add a die roll modifier from the dowry and consult the table below. If successful, Spain scores a victory point by adding a wedding victory point marker to their player card, and the suitor is placed in the married to box below the appropriate child. Also add a Spanish control marker to the appropriate box at the top of the royal wedding table for the nation involved. To mark dynastic alliances with Portugal, the HRE, or England, if one is not already present. If the marriage is postponed, the dowry remains and may be increased the next turn if desired. Yeah, you roll immediately. Always up to a maximum of 4 until one of the 2 royals dies, in which case the dowry is lost. And you need a 9 or better. The best you can get is a +4 on the die roll. That's not bad. My battery's back, but it's at a weird angle so that it actually charges. And that won't always work that way. Again, cleaning it can help, but not much. Okay, Alcasalvas peace wedding bonus. If the peace of Alcasalvas is signed between Portugal and Castile, the marriage of Isabella of Asturias with Alfonso of Portugal is immediately arranged and automatically successful as long as both are still alive. Award the 1 victory point immediately at no CP. This is the only marriage that can be celebrated outside the royal wedding phase. I assume it creates the dynastic alliance as well? I don't know. Objectives achieved, France isolated. If the Catholic monarchs succeed in simultaneously having control markers placed indicating that all 3 dynastic alliances are in place, they have achieved their objective to isolate France. Award 1 VP to Spain in each royal wedding phase in which all markers are in place. Death of a royal marriage. To conclude this phase, roll a die for each character listed in the table below. If the result is in the range shown for that turn, this royal dies and is removed from the game. If the royal is married, remove the Spanish control marker indicating the dynastic alliance. If this is the only current marriage between those powers, VP already earned or not affected. If Isabella dies, move Manuel the first into his box beneath the Maria counter. Okay. Major powers. All right. This is where we get into all the special rules. And like I said, it's about 20 pages of this. We have done 40 pages of rules in, what, like 6 hours? You know, I don't know whether or not I want to invest another 3 hours in all these special cases, but I'm going to load this one up because this is the main rules. A lot of these rules are already existing elsewhere. This is kind of like reading the EU events booklet, but not really. You know, there's stuff in here that's kind of like the special rules for major powers in EU, which I feel are of some importance to pay attention to. Like, you know, reactions with... So, for example, operations in the Nazareth home spaces, which create control markers and whatnot. This is something key right away at the beginning of the game, and it's of significant importance to understand. Might be able to find out what these counters are for. Don't know. Maybe they're Ottomans, maybe they're not. I saw the Ottoman rule there. Things like the Treaty of Tordesillas, what it's going to do. Things like consolidating power of the monarch. That's something France can just do all the time, right? That's the major power section. And then, you know, we go into, beyond that, a section of special rules. So the major powers have 12 pages of special rules, or 11, I don't know. I think it's 12. Then the minor powers have their own rules, including something that's kind of sort of base rules, which is resolving the diplomacy between them, you know, how you deal with them. So their actual special rules start here. So there's only a few pages of special rules for the minors. But, you know, I think I have to go through them because a significant amount of these rules have an impact on play throughout the game. But, like I said, a bunch of chrome at the end. And some of it's already duplicated elsewhere in the rules, but a lot of it's not. All right, up it goes.